Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my channel's monthly compendium for the month of May, 2022. Case file number 606, written by Carrig Frizz Warrior. When one step equals thousands. I experienced a time glitch about 5 years ago, and I'm still trying to figure out if there's a rational explanation. At the time, I was working in an office in Cork city centre, and the car park I used was over a kilometer away. There were a few different routes from the office to the car park, but it was all uphill on the way back to the car. If I took the shortest route and really rushed, practically ran, on a nice day, it would take at least 9 minutes. If I walked at my usual pace, it would take up to 14 minutes as there are several roads that need to be crossed. The day in question, I left the office along with 3 of my work colleagues. We left at 5 p.m. I checked with the others later, and yes, we left at exactly 5 p.m. The 4 of us walked part of the way together, and then the other 3 branched off as they used another nearer and more expensive car park. At the time, I used to walk to the car park to practice mindfulness. I tuned into my surroundings, listened to the sounds, looked at the people, experienced being in the moment, etc., etc. I remember climbing the steep stone steps on Kaiser's Quay beside Elizabeth Fort, and the next thing I was aware of was rounding the corner onto Tower Street. I got into my car totally confused. There was a big gap on my route. I got into my car, and the time in my car was showing as 5:07. Same on my watch. I turned on the car radio. Time check announced 7 minutes past 5. I could not have gotten there that fast, particularly as the first part of the walk included chatting with 3 work colleagues slowly. I racked my memory for the walk to the car, and there's a huge gap. I have no memory at all of walking along several of the streets. What is particularly strange is that one of my neighbors works in a dentist surgery along the route, and I would have usually waved in the window to her as I passed, so I would always look to see if she was still working, but I have no memory whatsoever of this section of the route. I would also add that Cork City is pretty old, and the area I was walking in is one of the oldest sections. Did I walk into some time loop and get spat out in a different place? I have thought about this over and over, but I cannot explain it. Case notes, file number 606. Right, we can eliminate a few things commonly associated with time glitches. Aliens? Sadly, highly unlikely given the packed density of a city combined with it only being 5 p.m. We can also eliminate a mind glitch like spacing out, suddenly sleepwalking, or sleep running because you got to your destination far faster than should be possible, even if you ran at top speed, because the first half of the walk you were walking slowly with your coworkers. The only mundane method to cover that distance would be in a vehicle, but why would someone pick you up of which you have no memory? Maybe hypnotism? There have been a few accounts of people being hypnotized suddenly, often by old ladies, but that doesn't quite fit right. What's the motive here? So, the only explanation that fits in my mind is a space-time portal. This usually seems to happen to drivers, one instant at point A, then at point B miles away. I suppose there's no reason it couldn't happen to someone just walking along too. That must be what happened. It does raise another question though. Why would a random space-time portal take you exactly where you needed to be? Why not 1,000 miles away in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, for instance? Or hell, under the ocean itself, instantly crushing you from the pressure. Due to how these portals seem to behave, I'm guessing they aren't random. They seem to be calibrated exactly so you appear still on the surface of the planet and not too far away. Or maybe that's survivorship bias? Maybe they are random and people are literally walking or driving to their deaths all the time as a result. And those are more missing 411 persons reports instead of glitch in the Matrix stories. Case file number 607, written by The Third Heat, 369. A Star-Spangled Glitch. It was July 4th, 2011, and obviously in the US, that's Independence Day. So I got together with a group of friends to go out. I had an early shift the following day, so I decided I shouldn't drink. The night was fun, but at around 8, I decided I should try to get back to my side of town before the fireworks started because I figured traffic and drunk driving would get worse if I stayed at my friend's house until after the fireworks. So I'm driving up this narrow side street going up towards my house. But this side street is one many of the locals use to get from my neighborhood to our south side, which is a major drinking and partying hotspot. Anyway, I had on this very distinctive and obnoxious American flag shirt where the body's part had red and white stripes and the arms were blue with white stars. I bought the shirt from a thrift store and have never seen anyone wear something similar, but who knows. Anyway, as I'm driving down the street, I see what looks like a woman with a similar shirt as mine, passed out, face down on the sidewalk. Like she looked like something was very seriously wrong too, as if she face planted into the ground or something. So I decided to pull over and go check on her, but because the street is so narrow, you can't just double park. You have to go and find a place to pull over. I park down the block and go back to help this lady. I have been down this road many times throughout my life, so I know the landmarks well, and I knew exactly where she had been laying. Also, even though I had to park down the street, I literally ran back to her. It couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 minutes max. I get to where I knew I saw her, and there's nothing. No sign of anyone, no one walking down the street or anything. It was so bizarre, and I got chills. I decided to drop it and go back to my car. As I'm getting ready to cross the street again, this car comes speeding up the street towards me, and before I could even think, it crashes smack into the retaining wall right by where I was just standing literally seconds before. Then this nutjob backs out and drives off. So one of the neighbors came out and we called the police, and I helped file a police report and then went home. When I got home, I called my mom to tell her about what had happened because I was still so shaken up. And she's the one who started putting things together and made me really think about this as if it's a glitch in the Matrix. She felt like I had somehow witnessed some alternate reality where I saw myself dead on the sidewalk, because in that reality, maybe a car struck me earlier than the car that arrived in this dimension. I don't know. I didn't really know what to make of it then, and I suppose I still don't. But coming here on Reddit today makes me think that maybe it was just another glitch in the Matrix. Bonus file, written by Zuzu of the Wolves, in the Root of Horror. In September, my partner and I signed the lease on a dream apartment. I was ridiculously excited and kept telling everyone I knew all about it, to the point where I was probably actually pretty annoying. One day, a friend of mine came to visit me at work, and of course I told her the news of our new place. She asked me where it was, and when I told her the location, she turned pale and seemed uncomfortable at best and flat out scared at worst. She asked to see a picture of the inside, and when I showed her, she let out a long sigh of relief, then proceeded to tell me one of the creepiest stories I've ever heard. It turns out that about 5 years ago, she had lived in the house directly next to mine with her sister and boyfriend. Starting almost immediately when they moved in, they began hearing noises out in the kitchen area at night when they were sleeping, and occasionally woke up to open cabinets or kitchen tools scattered around. Eventually, they started hearing what sounded like kids talking in low voices in the kitchen at night, occasionally crying, and crashes that sounded far off but still somewhere in the house. Around this time, my friend and her sister started to fight a lot and said that they had both been feeling extremely irritable about everything. Their house was broken into while they were all at work one night, but nothing was stolen except some cheap costume jewelry. There was cash, valuable jewelry, and designer clothing in the house, but it was all left untouched. Later in the same month, they received a visit from the cops, who said a neighbor had called about screaming and crying coming from the house, and they had reported that they left their kids there alone when they went out. Only one problem: they didn't have kids. The cops were called a few other times and finally got a search warrant, and somehow ended up finding a trapdoor under the kitchen window area that was covered in a layer of leaves and dirt. They found out that it was the remnants of a very, very old root cellar. I live in one of the oldest cities in America by European colonizer standards, and much of the structures are built on top of older structures. Apparently, one thing led to another in the search down there, and the police recovered some very old skeletal remains of 2 children. Nobody seemed to know if the skeletons or the root cellar were there first. During all of this, my friend and her sister broke their lease and moved out of there ASAP, as they were terrified to be there any longer in the presence of such tragedy. I went through with my lease and I live in the building next door to where all this happened. My apartment is an old adobe market that was converted into an apartment in the 70s, and it's been an absolute dream to live in. No scary vibes or noises at all. The couple who lived in that house now seem pretty nice and keep to themselves. We all have high privacy walls and coyote fences, and I feel tempted to see if they know all about this, but I'm afraid it might make them uncomfortable if I approach them about it. Bonus file, written by Avery Matthews. The devil went to our school. I'll give some background before I tell you the encounters I had. I went to an all-boys boarding school from the age of 8 until just after my 18th birthday. My school was old, and I mean old. It was founded over 450 years ago, back in 1552. To put that into a little context for my American friends, that's 245 years before the USA was even founded. With a place that old, it carries things. As you can probably imagine, I have a lot of stories from my 5 years of service at my school. Feel free to ask any questions. First encounter. The way my schooling worked was perhaps a little confusing to most. You started boarding in junior school at age 8, and then you would be moved to senior school at age 13. My junior school was a relatively new addition to the school, and I never had any paranormal encounters when I was growing up there. My first encounter happened in my first year of senior school. I was 13 and still getting used to my new senior workload, so I felt a little tired and overburdened as I was getting used to my new work schedule. But I was making friends with some of the boys in my year and things were looking up. At this point, I was probably the smallest boy in my year. I hadn't hit my growth spurt yet, and I wouldn't for a couple more years. The older boys in our schoolhouse would tell us stories of how the school was haunted, and that we should never adventure alone past sunset. My friends and I did not believe them in the slightest. We assumed that they were just playing tricks on the new boys, but we were so wrong. I remember the first time something odd happened. I was quite under the weather and at a high temperature. This was within my first month of moving into the school. My teacher suggested I should take a cold shower. It was late in the evening and showers were usually reserved for the first thing in the morning unless you had PE that day. I remember feeling rather dizzy, and so my friend offered to accompany me. We went down to the shower room together. Having showers at my school was probably the most awkward thing I remember about my time there. One big open room with a dozen or so shower heads. That was a tough thing to get used to when I first started boarding at 8 years old, but I did get used to it rather quickly. I was never really shy about my body or anything like that, but still, there were at least 2.5 dozen boys in my schoolhouse, all crammed together in a completely open, communal shower room. It was awkward to say the least. But back to the point. When my friend and I went down late in the evening, we placed our clothes under a shower head that wasn't going to be used by either of us and got in the shower. The hot water boiler would not have been on at that time in the evening, so my cold shower certainly was cold. After around 5 minutes, my friend and I stood in the freezing cold water. All at once, every unused shower turned on full blast. As well as that, the freezing water suddenly turned boiling hot, like red hot, dangerously so. I'm sure if my friend and I didn't manage to get out of the way of the water before it reached full temperature, we would have been burnt badly. We immediately made a run for the door of the shower room, but it was locked and we couldn't get it opened. We started panicking, as you could imagine. Remember, the scene is 2 naked 13-year-old boys slamming on the shower door with all we could muster. Then, almost as fast as they all started, the showers all stopped. I remember that my heart was racing like it had never raced before. I remember feeling as if I was drowning in steam from the showers. After that, the showers started spurting out something that looked like bright red blood, and I won't ever forget the smell, like rusty metal mixed with sewage. My friend and I were truly cowering at the door by this point. I'll speak for myself when I say that was the scariest thing I'd ever experienced up until that point in my life. Then again, the water stopped and the door unlocked. Our clothes were truly ruined, along with our towels. My teachers were very strict. They could be downright mean. You do not want to be punished at my school. And that's what terrified us more in that moment. We were more scared of being sent to the headmaster's office than we were of whatever event just happened, paranormal or not. So we did our best to clean up, but it didn't work. The room still looked as if a bomb had been dropped, so we went to our head of house and explained what happened, or tried to. He seemed confused, perhaps even slightly scared. He told us to go back to our dorm. The next day, the shower room was closed, and we had to use another house's room. As I said, this was probably the first time I experienced something that I cannot explain, whether it was paranormal or not, which personally I'm almost certain it was. How else would all the showers turn themselves on and the door lock itself? This is only one story from my 5 years at my school, and honestly, this is one of the mildest. On to the second encounter. This takes place around 2 months after the last incident with the showers. It was the first Christmas holiday, and most boys were packing up to spend 2 weeks at home with their parents. My parents had already written to me and they said they were too busy for me to come home, so I would be spending the holiday there. I have to admit I was disappointed, but I did as I was told. All of the friends I had made left for the holiday, so I was pretty lonely, but I was enjoying some rest time. For those of you who don't know how most boarding schools in Britain work, we had a 6-day week. We had normal lessons all day from Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday, we had to attend a church service for the first half of the day, meaning we only got one afternoon off to rest in the week, so I spent most of the time I was allowed to in bed reading books. The weird things were more prominent when it was the holidays. It was as if whatever energies were there became braver when there were less people around. In my schoolhouse, around 2.5 dozen boys, but only 4 had stayed for the holiday. Only 1 was the same age as me, and none had stayed from my dorm room, which I have to admit I was thrilled about. Well, I was at first, anyway. The first couple or so nights went fine. I was doing my 13-year-old boy thing, and I won't go into any more detail about that. But after the first days of peace, the weird things started again. At first, it wasn't anything major. Echoes of screams and moans coming from the courtyard. But I rationalized it as older boys playing pranks. But it did scare me. Yet I didn't want to appear weak or fall into the prank, so I slept through my fears and I didn't ask any of the other boys to come and sleep in my dorm with me. So I slept, and when I woke, every other bed in my dorm apart from mine had been moved to the far side of the dorm, which thoroughly freaked me out. But again, I assumed it was a prank from some of the older boys. And if it's one thing I had learned by this point, if you're being pranked or joked on in any way, show no weakness, or it will keep happening. So I moved all the beds back myself, and I went down for a shower. When I got down there was another boy already in the shower room. I can't remember exactly how old he was, but he was in the older years, so probably around 15 or 16. For this story, I'll name him Toby. By this point, I was used to showering with others, so I didn't care that he was there at all. He told me his plan for sneaking down at night and breaking into the dessert kitchen and having a midnight feast. He asked if I wanted to join him, and though I had never done anything against the rules before, he assured me that he had done it loads and had never been caught, so I agreed. Later that day, I got ready in a suit of all black to be able to sneak around more effectively. Toby was just wearing his normal clothes and looked at me like I was a huge nerd when I explained my reasoning for my clothes, and so we started sneaking down to the kitchen. When we got there, we started eating as much ice cream as we could. When suddenly, a whole shelf of tin food threw itself onto the floor and the kitchen doors slammed themselves shut. I looked at Toby in a "what do we do" kind of way. We picked up food and left almost as quickly as we came. Toby and I started walking back towards our schoolhouse. This is the bit that still gives me the chills. We heard footsteps coming up the hall on the way back. We assumed this would be a teacher, but we found somewhere to hide until they had passed. But no one came and we carried on walking back towards our dorm. This is when I felt something grab my leg and yank it. I got back up. We looked around us and there was no one around. We started running because we both were scared when something yanked Toby's leg. He fell, and he fell way worse than I did and banged the front of his head and gave him a bloody nose. He got back up relatively quickly. He was a rugby boy and was used to this kind of thing, By this point, we were sprinting full speed back to our schoolhouse. We got back. We swore we wouldn't speak of what happened again out of fear of getting into trouble. I went to my dorm and tried to get to sleep, but I was terrified of what had just happened. After a couple hours of just laying, I managed to get to sleep. I woke up at some point in the night to my bed, along with the others in my dorm, being slammed into the far side of the room with force. At this point, I was completely over having my own dorm room. I got up and went into Toby's dorm. I explained what happened in my dorm to someone I thought would understand me. He told me that he knew what I was talking about, and he told me to make a bed in his dorm, and I slept there for the rest of the holiday. On the plus side, Toby looked out for me during the time he was at the school, and we still keep in touch now. The third and final encounter. This event happened in the summer of my first year, meaning I was 14 years old and the school year was almost over. At this point, you've already heard a few of the other events that had transpired. However, nothing had happened in so long that I was beginning to move on from it all. Toby, my friend, would still check up on me from time to time, and we had made a promise that we would come to each other first if we thought anything paranormal was going on. Toby was a very comforting person, and I felt very safe when he was around me. I woke up at 6:30 a.m., and my dorm all headed down to the shower room to get ready for the day. All seemed normal, until we finished showering when we noticed that all of the clothes and towels that we had brought down with us had vanished. Obviously, our first thought was that some of the boys from the older year groups had taken them as a prank, which I suppose is possible, and probably what I would have believed if I didn't know any better. We tried sticking our heads through the shower room door for a bit and shouting that we needed some help, but either no one heard or no one cared enough to help us. And so, we were stuck naked in the shower room with no clothes or towels. Eventually, my friend, who I will call Peter, volunteered to head out of the shower room and back to our dorm so he could get some clothes for the rest of us. Around 3 minutes after Peter left, we heard the most horrific scream. A scream filled with pain and fear. A scream that echoed through the halls. Us boys didn't know what to do. We still had no clothes and we hoped it was just a mistake and that Peter would stop in a moment. For what felt like an endless 10 seconds, we all froze. Then almost as fast, we snapped back. We ran to our friend. I remember feeling my heartbeat in my throat as we found him collapsed on the floor, trying to drag himself back towards us. The bone in his leg was sticking out of his skin. The moment I saw it, I could feel my head go light. I felt dizzy, and if it wasn't for one of my other friends grabbing me, I think I would have collapsed myself. Peter was still screaming as he looked at us and said 5 words that still sent shivers down my spine. "Get me away from him!" By this point, a group of teachers had found us. We were taken back to our dorm and told to get dressed. The headmaster called us all in for questioning, where we explained what happened, but of course he didn't believe us. His theory was that we thought it would be funny to streak naked around the school after our showers, but since we were wet, Peter slipped and broke his leg. No matter how many times we tried to explain ourselves, he didn't listen. Peter had to go to hospital, and after our punishment period was over, we were allowed to visit him. I asked him what had happened, and he told us that on his way to the dorm, he had seen the devil in our school, and that if we hadn't arrived there in time, that the devil was going to kill him. Having spoken to Peter before writing this post, he still believes that the devil was there at our school that day. After some of the things that I experienced, I have no reason to doubt him. Something that I have noticed while retelling some of my stories, a lot of them have centered around or started in the shower room. Our schoolhouse's shower room was the oldest part of the building, but there was something more to the shower room than that. The stories of things that first and second year boys would be put through in the name of initiations to their house didn't need a paranormal aspect to be horrifying, and those initiations were only officially put a stop to a couple years before I joined the school. Those things being stopped is one of the only things I'm grateful for about my time at boarding school. But what a time it was. Case notes, bonus file. So as I was reading this, my mind was adrift with possibilities of the paranormal, but I never considered the devil. It's interesting to ponder, isn't it? I'm not very religious myself. I consider myself agnostic. I don't know if the devil and God and heaven and which religion would be true or not. I'm open to any possibility though. In this case, do I think it was the actual manifestation of the devil? No, I don't. I don't think the devil, if he exists, would bother with just a plain old boarding school. But I do think if there was a spirit there that was malevolent, or maybe a demon, that they could impersonate the devil. I mean, why not? Who knows if it's even what the devil truly looks like? I mean, we only have our own imaginations to work from, what we think the devil looks like, you know, the red skin and the horns and all that. But whatever was there, clearly was malevolent. Imagine the amount of negative energy required to turn water boiling hot and then into blood and sewage. It's not like he could have crossed some plumbing together and then somehow there's blood in it. There's no blood plumbing as far as I know. So yeah, that's one of the most evil things I've ever heard of. I'm glad you got out of there safely. I think I would have run away. Case file number 608, written by Nadikin Z. Thank God it's Friday. This happened several years ago at TGI Fridays in Killeen, Texas. I was eating with my family when we saw our friend Jesse sitting at the bar across the restaurant. Jesse is easy to spot, with broad shoulders and a distinct widow's peak, and he was even wearing a green striped shirt such as he often wore. We called out to him, but he didn't hear us. Some guy he was sitting with noticed and told him we were trying to get his attention, so Jesse started walking towards us. And it was only when he came within about 10 feet of us that I realized it wasn't really him. He was almost identical, but not quite. Of course, this poor guy looked very confused to be summoned to a table full of strangers. Embarrassed, I apologized and explained that we had thought he was our friend Jesse. He was understanding, but then explained that his name was Jesse. So it had been extra confusing that we seemed to know him, but he didn't know us. It was some time later that we were eating at TGI Fridays again when I caught sight of a server and immediately smiled and raised my hand to greet her. I knew her very well, not as a server, but as someone significant enough in my life that I'd actually hung out with her. As she seemed to look right through me, I put my hand down and figured I must be wrong. But I was so confused because the feeling I had was so strong that I knew who she was. It drove me crazy, but there was nothing I could do about it. She then turned out to be our server. She took my dad's order first, and then when she turned to me, her eyes widened and she said, "I know you. How do I know you?" I went through every possible scenario we could think of and never could figure out how our paths had crossed. And I can guarantee you, they just had not. We covered all bases, and even if we had passed each other in a store or something, it would not explain the intense familiarity we both felt. I began to joke about the mysticism of that particular TGI Fridays. After the double Jesse experience, 2 friends of mine, each in an unrelated event, encountered other doubles and told me about it. I'd told them we were going to start calling it Doppelganger Fridays. Of course, this all seems like pure coincidence. But it's just interesting that it keeps happening at the same place. Case notes, file number 608. I've never been to a TGI Fridays before, and I've never seen my doppelganger either. I feel so left out. Now, that Jesse encounter could be pure coincidence, though it's indeed a large and trippy coincidence nevertheless, with the same name even. The fact people keep encountering their lookalikes, though probably not actual doppelgangers because they're not exactly the same looking, makes me think there's something about the location of that specific TGI Friday that is attracting specific people to it. I think your instincts were correct, it's about the location. It almost feels like what a trickster or a particularly funny server developer would do to mess with people's minds. I know because it's something I intend to do if I ever ascend to Universal Server Developer. Or at least a server mod. Come on, you guys up there? You hear me? I want in. Give me all the power. I won't abuse it. Well, not too much. Case file number 609, written by Beyond Sight, 7-11. Double lives, double deaths. Here's a little backstory so you know where I'm coming from. Years ago, I went to private school, which would have been great, but I noticed a few things that were off. I should have left well enough alone, but I didn't. Needless to say, I discovered wrongdoings and became the target. I was mentally abused, locked in rooms and bullied into silence by a so-called holy man. I have not seen this man in 20 years. 2 weeks ago, I was struck with the notion he was going to pass away. I look on social media to find he's been hospitalized. I called my mom and told her I had a feeling he's going to pass away. The following Monday, it is posted of his passing. I screenshotted the announcement and made some phone calls. I sent the picture to my brother, who asked me to remove the image because he doesn't want to see him, as we were all targets of his holy hate. 3 days later, I see a post asking for everyone to pray for him again as he has been hospitalized. I read and reread the post. I go to look for the announcement of his passing from 3 days prior, and it's gone. It's no longer in my screenshots. The conversation with my brother is still present though, with the removed message tag from where I had sent the images as the only evidence that existed. He passed away last Monday, again, just like he did in the following Monday. The same image was posted again, along with all the same comments of how he was such a great man, which I read all over again. So I'm not sure if this is classified as a glitch, or if you lead double lives, you die twice. Once for the man you are, and again for the man they all thought you were. Bonus file, written by KS Ghostly Girl, The Early Morning Ghost. For some background, I currently work as a service writer for a local repair shop, and I've recently been the first one into the office in the mornings. Our building is older and in a downtown area of our town. It's housed several shops over the years. A few weeks ago, my boss started joking about the ghost that scared one of our techs on a closing shift by banging around. We all laughed it off as an old building being creaky, recent plumbing issues, roofing issues, and etc. Shortly after that, I started hearing the banging occasionally when I was in a shop alone opening. For some context, our office sits elevated over a storage area, and some of our bays sit lower than the office itself. It sounded like the banging was coming directly from under my desk. It was unsettling, but it wasn't happening every morning, so it was easy enough to write off. This morning, I was in the office alone again and had just arrived, so hadn't turned on any lights yet. The only lights were from outside and some of the lights we leave on in the bays. As I went into the break room to put my lunch away, the banging started. I continued through my routine, but instead of calming down as usual, the banging picked up and almost sounded like it was moving around. I finally couldn't stand it anymore, so I opened the window to the bays and leaned out to see if I could see any reason at all that would explain it. Right as I was leaning, back out of the corner of my eye, I saw my chair roll across the room. As soon as it hit the wall, the banging stopped. I was half tempted to wait for the rest of our crew outside, but managed to hold it together. I definitely don't want to be alone anymore. Case file number 610, written by VRoll95. More candy than I ever bargained for. There was an old lady that sat close to the entrance of a huge mall near my home, selling different types of candy. She seemed very poor and fragile, at least 80 years old, and in the multiple times I would pass through her, my heart would always break a little. I would want to buy some candy from her to help her out, but now we live in the world of credit cards and I would never have change on me. One time, I even expressed this feeling of regret to my girlfriend when we went to watch a movie in that mall. She said she felt the same, that she would picture her grandmother in a situation like that and feel sad too. Then, a couple months ago, I was going to the mall to buy some cooking utensils with my mother, who was visiting me at the time. I saw the old lady again, selling her candy, and passed by. But when we were almost at the store, I remembered that this time I had a bunch of coins and a couple dollars in my wallet, so I went back. I showed her all the money I had on me and asked how much candy it could buy. I got a Mentos and 4 pieces of bubblegum. I showed her the candy and asked if that amount was okay. Her eyes were barely open. Her voice was low and raspy, but she smiled a little and said something like, "Yes, son, don't worry. God bless." I went back to join my mom, feeling a little better. Now, ever since I'm little, I have loved candy. My grandma would buy boxes of this stuff, and she would have to hide it so I wouldn't eat it all in a day, especially gum. I go through them really fast. So in about 10 minutes I was done with all the 4 pieces of bubblegum and reached to my pocket to start eating the Mentos. But when I took my hand out of the pocket, there were 4 additional pieces of bubblegum on my hand, on top of the box of Mentos. We were walking through the store and I stopped in my tracks. I explained what had happened to my mom, but she just laughed and dismissed me. I distinctly remember counting all the candy to make sure I wouldn't take any more than my money's worth, and even showing it to the old lady. It is very minor, especially compared to the other stories in the sub, but it made me feel nice. I think about it a lot still, and it makes me feel a little curious and good. I never saw the old lady sitting there ever again. What does this mean? Case file number 611, written by Please Don't M. I know what death feels like. Last year, my cat Snoopy got hit by a car and died. We lived in a very rural area in Germany, directly next to an elementary school, so I was not worried about letting him out alone. One day, I let him out in the morning. I remember being a bit worried because he had some diarrhea, but nothing serious, and I just went on my laptop. Later that morning, it was like a thought had struck me, and all I could think was, Snoopy is dead, just out of nowhere. I ignored it and did some breathing because I had felt like someone was dying before, mostly my dad or a friend of his killing themselves, so I just thought it was one of those weird moments. I usually check in with my dad when that happens, just in case, or maybe because I want to keep him from doing it. He's bipolar, so it would make sense. I had never felt any of that for my cat though. Anyways, after a few hours, I hear someone knocking on the door and my mom answering it. I hear her say, "Oh no," and then walk up to my door and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be insane if Snoopy was actually dead? He was. The only thing I could reply to my mom was, I knew it. When I went out to get him, he was lying on the side of the street next to our house, completely cold and starting to smell. He must have died a few hours before that, around the time I had that strange feeling. Needless to say, I still check in with my dad when I get that weird feeling. Case notes, file number 611. There's a known phenomenon, especially in those with high empathy, where they can legitimately feel the pain of others. Our brains can replicate certain sensations of sorrow, grief, sometimes even physical pain of those around us who we love if they're suffering. Whenever this is studied, it's always with visual examples, direct sight, or at least written and acknowledged. Still, those empathy centers can light up as long as the information is received to the brain, even if it's subconscious. I don't know exactly how the information is being received into our brains, but there's no denying at this point that we are able to receive it for those to whom we're connected to, across great distances even. Countless stories I've read of people knowing something is wrong with their spouse or parents, even grandparents. They literally feel it, feeling of dread. And yes, even our pets. My bet is it's dependent on how active they are in our minds. The more we think about them, the more pronounced the connection is, and the more visceral it hits us if something happens to them. In many cases, it's gut-wrenching. Rest in peace, Snoopy. Creepy file number 17, written by Zim Beam. When the forest stalks its prey. At the time this happened, I was a 13-year-old female. So this happened 2 years ago and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates whose phone numbers I had, and around 1 or 2 I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place, I guess. Once my parents left around 8-ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they engraved into me, lock the door. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. The night drew on, and I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often, I would look over my shoulder and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold and was nearly pitch black with a few streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet now. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large, wide field with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning that they went the opposite way of the road since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest/road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably late 30s to early 40s, dark hair with a beard. He was probably around average height, 5'9", but at the time it seemed like he was a giant, 6 foot tall at least. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take. So when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started just to quickly walk through the woods, or at least get to the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious. But it only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, from here, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away. I ran faster than I've ever ran before. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards, and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and burst through it, shoving it closed behind me, and I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights and hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife just in case he got in. He wasn't lucky. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end, but it doesn't. After a few months, I haven't really told anyone what's happened since I don't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on the bus. She described him almost the exact same way as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Then, around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. The guy who stalked me, actually. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position or even dead. So, creepy nighttime stalker who liked to hunt down young girls and sexually assault them, let's not meet again. Case file number 612, written by Raptor Hello Kitty, The Maze of Oblivion. These events happened in 2011, and I still don't have a logical explanation for them. I was doing a year abroad in the south coast of Britain to learn English. We were students between 16 and 18 years old, living in host families, so we didn't have much money or anything to do besides chilling outside or going to the beach in our free time. A Friday afternoon, we met 2 students from another school at the beach, and they asked us, my best friend and I, if we wanted to join them for a drinking night near their campus tonight. We said yes and invited some of our friends to the evening too. Some of us wanted to go home to take a shower or change our clothes, but me, my best friend, and 2 men from our friend group were living too far away, so we decided to go to the park next to the campus and wait there for everyone as the weather was perfect. We didn't know that place at all. We walked 30 minutes from the beach following our new friend's instructions. We were staying on a bench in the middle of a big park. Then my best friend and I went for a walk because we needed to pee. We were chatting and laughing. I remember the sky because it was sunset at golden hour. We wanted to explore the park a little bit because it had a beautiful garden. I remember seeing a green maze and asking my best friend to go there, and nothing else. With my best friend, we both woke up at 8:30 in her bed in her host family's home. We were wearing pajamas, feeling great and nothing messy in the room. What the hell? We opened Facebook to ask everybody what happened last night and nobody had an answer. The problem is we had a reputation of being outgoing and unpredictable, so when they didn't see us coming back, the boys didn't take it seriously and started drinking without giving a damn about us. Later, other people joined and everybody thought we were back home. We didn't know the road from the park to her home, didn't have smartphones or maps, didn't have money for taxi or public transportation. Some more information. This was a 12-hour complete memory loss, sunset at 8 p.m. Alcohol was present, but we didn't drink yet. No drugs, and we were all underage students. Every house/road looked the same in the city, and we didn't know the neighborhood at all. My best friend's host family didn't hear us coming back either. No injury, no hangovers, or dizziness. It happened at Guildridge Park, plus Manor Gardens, but what gives me goosebumps is that I don't see that maze anymore on maps. It's just not there. Or was it ever there? 10 years later, it still bothers me. We were best friends in England, but haven't seen each other since then. I managed to find her on Instagram and asked her if that's all in my head or if she is also still freaked out by this. She has no explanation and tries not to think about it anymore. It makes her feel uneasy. I'm glad because some people don't believe my story. Case notes, file number 612. You mentioned that the maze wasn't there on Google Maps. No small detail, I think. This sounds like hypnotism, to be made to see something that doesn't exist in physical reality. The reason I like this glitch is because 2 people are involved. That distills the mundane possibilities out, or far down. Could one single person blank out and forget what happened in a night, through drugs or even a medical condition? Sure, it's rare, but sure. 2 people, though, at exactly the same time? Odds of that are astronomical. So dare I say aliens again? I'm not sure what else could create a memory loss of this type and so suddenly. My guess is that when aliens abduct us, they implant false memories into our minds, and if they're unable to implant them, or they don't stick, they either kill the subject or erase their memories. Or hell, maybe this tech of theirs is flawed. Maybe they don't always know if the implanted memory has taken hold in the subject. You see that maze, and perhaps it's only what you both are made to remember. It's your brains trying to suggest to you something is off. The memories are there but lost, inaccessible. By the way, hypnotherapy can be helpful to retrieve repressed memories, but I do advise caution if you pursue that avenue. Maybe it's best not to scratch at that barrier. As Death would say, don't tear at the wall, because what's behind it, you might not like. Case file number 613, written by Win Creative 3773, The Secretive Grimm Hotel. This one's been on my mind for quite a while now. I've been wanting to get people's opinions for a while, but I never really dared to. So here I go. In 2018, a group of friends from college and I decided to go spend a month in Berlin over the summer. We spent our time between part-time jobs, partying, and just simply enjoying the city and its cultural activities. Everyone in the group was cycling, but not me. We had a bit of a bike situation with mine, and so I decided to spend the rest of our time there on foot or using the U-Bahn, metro. It wasn't that much of a bother until we decided to go and party near the River Spree. This place has bars and clubs, and it's overall a great place to party. But from what I recall, public transportation didn't go that far in the middle of the night. They had all cycled there, so I was the only one without means to go back to our apartment. It was a 20-minute cycle from the bar, but it was at least a 35-minute walk. A friend of mine, I'll call her Eva for the sake of the story, decided to walk back with me and just take her bike next to her so as to not leave me alone wandering the city in the middle of the night. It was about 4 a.m. Now arrives the glitch. As we were walking down this rather big street and chatting, I remember smelling food and seeing this restaurant past the pedestrian crossing to which we were headed. I'm a foodie and I was rather hungry, so that was pretty appealing. A woman was sitting there having food, black hair. I could see her profile through the large windows which took up almost the entire wall, up to the ceiling. I specifically remember thinking, damn, that's weird they're still open at this time of night. I gotta tell Eva when the flow of the conversation allows. As I was walking and starting to cross the road, the crossing in front of the restaurant, things got blank and it's like I was on autopilot. I was hearing her voice kinda muffled. Once we were past the restaurant, Eva stopped, turned to me and said, "Wait, wasn't there a restaurant just there with a woman eating?" I had completely forgotten to tell her. It's like my memory had been wiped and restored within seconds. And there it was, a hotel. The large windows were the same, and inside was the hotel's restaurant with a layout and tables that looked nothing like what we saw now. No woman was eating there either. We were both very shocked and saw that the receptionist, male, short hair, was in there. And I knew we just had to ask him if somebody was eating there just now. It was just too freaking weird. He was kinda freaked out about us coming in like that and said he'd been alone for hours. After discussing with Eva, we found out that she saw the woman eating, but she only saw her back. She was seated with her back to the window. When I could tell this woman was Asian because as she was seated, her profile was showing to me. After that, Eva never wanted to talk about it again. Even got pissed when I tried to bring it up. Also, people seem to have changed around me after this event. Even my mom didn't remember something she should have. A lot of people seemed different overall. I must also note that I wasn't drunk at all and staying up this late was really uncommon for me at that stage. Oh, and fun fact, the name of the hotel is the Grimm Hotel, in reference to the author of many fairy tale stories. This story is true though. It's on Alte Jakobstrasse in Berlin Mitte, if you want to look it up. Any thoughts? Bonus file, written by Gas Station Clerk, the Wormhole gas stations. Back in June of 2021, I had moved, and while driving, we went through Wisconsin. I can't really remember the town or anything, so sorry for that, but it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. We had stopped to try and get gas, but when we got into one town, it was like a ghost town. Absolutely no cars or anything. And while yes, it was pretty early, keep in mind we had seen plenty of cars up to this point. But regardless, we noticed the gas station and it was lit up, all the lights on inside, an open light glowing and everything. Yet, when we got closer and tried going into the doors, they were locked, and even went around the back looking for a car and nothing, not to mention all the gas pumps said, out of order. We got back in the car, not really thinking anything of it until we found another gas station maybe a block away, and I'm not even joking when I say the exact same thing happened. So by now I was a bit put off, but I wasn't about to convince myself we entered some weird wormhole until it happened a third time. At this point, I didn't even want to get out of the car, but I needed to stretch my legs. When I did get out though, and my friend who was driving went to the doors, yet again nothing. When he was on his way back to the car, there was a blood-curdling scream. It genuinely made me sick to my stomach, and keep in mind it was so freaking quiet up to this point. But we made our way back out of there as fast as we could and didn't see any cars until we got back on the highway. And after that, after getting settled in my apartment, me and my roommates just didn't feel well. When I was unpacking with one of them, something fell twice and we still don't know what it was. A few days later, my other roommate had said she felt like there was something in the apartment. Granted, I'm a paranoid person by default, so I don't know what the hell to call this. It was just a weird experience and a great story to tell. But it is persistent. Creepy file number 19, written by Kenny Gallen. When the treetops purr. Can't say whether or not this is supernatural, just that it's definitely odd and I can't explain it. I would absolutely welcome a rational explanation. My family and I rent a little farmhouse on an old tree farm in southwest Washington. It's extremely remote. We have one neighbor, a cattle farmer, about half a mile away across the creek as the crow flies, more like a mile by road. One night I was out gardening. I'm a night owl who farms and has a full-time job, and I heard the weirdest sound coming from what sounded like the canopy of the dense Douglas fir forest behind our garden. It sounded like a giant cat purring, but it moved relatively quickly around the same section of the forest. At first, I wrote it off as a drone, which was weird but not unimaginable. But when the sound got closer and louder, it seemed more organic to me. It sounded undulated, like it was coming from something alive, like how cats' purrs are rhythmic according to their breath. We get out a fair share of choppers, wildfire fighting practice, military training, logging choppers, all around our property. But this didn't sound like that at all. Not nearly loud enough, even from a distance, and it sounded closer. There are definitely wild cats around us. We've seen bobcats, and I'm sure there are cougars. We live adjacent to thousands and thousands of acres of timber forest, completely wild and unclaimed. But this cat would have had to have been jumping from treetop to treetop extremely quickly, which seems hilariously impossible. That basically leaves a drone, which just seems so weird. There were no lights, it never came above the tree line, and it was at night. I could see the timber company surveying with drones, maybe even doing some fire scouting. Really hard to imagine them doing it at night in the dark, and circling the one section that's not owned by the timber companies. My husband heard it too, and agreed it was weird. It happened last summer, and it's made me wonder from time to time. It wasn't really that scary, it was easy to forget about, but I've just never been able to properly explain it. It's not like it even lines up with any paranormal legends I've heard. I'd love anyone's ideas. Case notes, creepy file number 19. So first off, gardening at night sounds extremely peaceful. Especially if the full moon is out, so you have enough light to make it practical. Second, I don't think it's a drone either, mainly by how you describe the actions of the drone. That said, I recently learned that many local municipalities employ drone pilots to scout properties to make sure nothing new was built. They really want their taxes, which kinda irks me if I am honest. If it was a drone, who'd have the motive to stalk some random rural homestead? It doesn't really make sense. Just to be safe, I'd keep that home very secure, but I'm sure you already do that. Case file number 614, written by All for Fun. Ribbit. Okay, so this is a dank one, to be honest. I have this tree frog in my kitchen, near the windows. I also have several lizards as well, and a few other animals as well, but those are unrelated. This is not a pet, by the way, just a more than welcome guest. Anyway, this frog is weird. It gives off weird vibes and seems to disappear into thin air. I technically had no proof of any effort afoot, it was just a feeling, but a little incident last night confirmed it, for me at least. I heard a noise in the kitchen, thought it was a rat, and was scared it was harassing the frog. So I go into the kitchen and see the frog in a place I have never seen it before. It was almost below the cabinets on a butter box I had on the shelf. I stared at it in awe because I was expecting a rat. I head back to my room. Maybe around 20 to 30 minutes later, I go to look at it again and get some water. It was not on the box anymore, so I went to get a better look. There was no sign of the frog being around, and yes, I peered into the cabinets and saw the gap between the wall and the cabinets. I also looked in its normal area, no signs. I turned around for like 10 to 15 seconds, and when I looked back, it was on the wall near the cabinets. There was no way for me to not see it coming out of my room or getting pretty close to the wall where it was without seeing it. A green frog on a white wall is pretty visible. Plus, it's not fast moving, like it takes a step every 10 seconds when moving, except when leaping. So it would seem it manifested while I was turned around. Also seen it glitch slightly, but I've less personal proof of that. For those asking how I heard it from my room is literally right next to it, connected with a door. Case file number 615, written by Emily Ain't a Spicy Name, a slice of two realities. This happened around a month or 3 weeks ago, and I don't know where to begin because I'm still trying to comprehend what I saw. I'm working with my boss in the back warehouse where we have a bright tank, carbonating beer or hard seltzer type thing, with a pressure gauge connected to the tank. The gauge was laid down, connected by a tube to the tank, so we had to pick up the gauge to read it. My boss bends down to grab the gauge to read it, and he immediately retracts his hand when he touches it, either the gauge or the surface below it, I'm unsure, saying, "Ouch," describing what he said felt like a shock or a needle prick / piece of glass getting stuck in his finger, and I saw it too. I saw the skin split and the blood begin to well up. Then immediately, it all disappeared. The cut itself was large enough that it would have bled for at least 20 to 30 seconds, paper cut-like. I could see the two separated bits of skin and blood begin to well. I was right next to him. But then it disappeared, completely. His skin had no blemish at all. My boss starts to pick at his finger, presumably to remove the piece of glass. Then he, in surprised tones, says something along the lines of, "It's gone?" referring to the cut. Even after admitting this, he's still trying to find glass in his finger. Here's the kicker. There was never any glass broken in this location. I've watched the entire facility get rented and set up, and never have we dropped glassware and broken it in the spot where he got pricked. When this instance occurred, we both were baffled. It felt like I just witnessed my boss getting cut and not getting cut at the same time. It's as if the tip of one reality made contact with the tip of another, then split apart instantaneously. Perhaps in another reality, there was a sliver of glass there from breaking something, and it got missed when sweeping it up, but I am certain not in ours. And the cut I saw was too deep to close up in a split second like that. No blood anywhere, no glass, no scar. Bonus file, written by Second Fiddle 00, 2 Days of Life and Death. I'm pretty new to Reddit and didn't know you could post anything on here. I have a love/hate relationship telling the story. I was 12 years old and lived next to an elderly woman who I think was 95 or 96 years old. Our houses were relatively close to each other. Every day, she would go inside and sit on her porch and would wave at me when I got home from school. I would usually talk with her for a bit and ask her about her day and what she did. She liked me a lot and would tell me I reminded her of her son when he was young. I remember this day like it was yesterday. I got home and immediately realized she wasn't sitting on her porch. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. The day after, again, she wasn't sitting on her porch. I went on with my day, and around 6 p.m., I went to knock on her door to check on her. I knocked and looked through the glass on her windows and saw someone walking towards the back of her house. I couldn't make out the clothes she was wearing, but it looked like the end of a white robe. I kept knocking for about 10 minutes before, like an annoying 12-year-old, unlocking the door with the key she gave me and entering her home. It was eerily quiet in her house, not a sound, but it was stupid cold in there. I entered and looked around before I yelled out, "Mrs. McKinsey, are you okay?" I waited for a response and heard a very faint, "Yes." The thing is, it didn't sound like her. I was about to go to her room before I had this feeling of dread and decided to leave her house and lock up. The next day, I went outside as it was a weekend and saw her son and a few other people there. I went over and greeted her son, who was also very nice to me. He told me she died almost 2 days ago. He lived very far away and decided to check on her when she didn't pick up her phone for 2 days. When he told me that, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I immediately started asking if he was sure she died 2 days ago, and he said yes. I went home and was scared to tell anyone, fearing that I would be looked at as crazy. I don't know what I heard or saw, but it still gives me chills. Case file number 616, written by Lynn Nevermore 18, an unexpected family photograph. I think that I saw a photo of my parents from another reality. I was at the mall with my friend. I won't say which mall for privacy reasons. and we were on our way to the bathroom when we saw this giant picture on the wall. The picture was of different people that had visited the mall over the years. I'm not sure if it was a photo of the exact mall that we were in or not, but at the bottom corner I saw a photo of a couple that looked exactly like my parents. Now I know a lot of people can simply look similar, but the resemblance was uncanny. It was a smaller photo, so I couldn't exactly see the details, but the couple in the photo had an uncanny resemblance to my parents. Here are some things that stood out to me. My parents are a biracial couple. My dad is black and my mom is white. What are the odds that another biracial couple that looks so similar to them would be in that picture at the exact same time? The woman in the photo was holding a Victoria's Secret bag. My mom does not shop at Victoria's Secret, so there's no way it could have been her. The man in the photo was wearing sandals and my dad does not own a pair of sandals like that. My mom also does not own a shirt like the woman in the photo had on. Most importantly, my parents have never been to that exact mall. Now again, I'm not sure if the people in the photo were from the exact same mall that we're in now. I will have to go back and check around to compare the photo to both malls. I am convinced that the people I saw in the photo are my parents' doppelgangers from another reality. Perhaps since me and my brother were not in the photo, one where they don't have kids? My friend and her mom also agreed they looked similar, but thought that the man in the photo was more overweight than my dad. Please let me know what you think of this event. Case Notes, File Number 616. So, to be fair here, there are 8 billion people on Earth currently. Well, 7.93 billion to be precise. That's a lot of dice rolls when it comes to lookalikes and coincidences. That said, if you distill the odds down, your situation would be exceptionally rare regardless of how many dice are tossed around. Being biracial and looking so strikingly similar to your parents, and also being in your local geographic area, this eliminates a huge swath of that 7.93 billion people. So is it just an extreme coincidence? Perhaps. If this is a glitch though, I'd consider your guess to be the most accurate. That we would be peering into a parallel universe and seeing a mall picture that really was of your parents in that universe where they didn't have kids, and maybe your dad eats a few extra donuts in that universe to explain the extra weight. Lucky dad, eh? My guess is if this is accurate, if you head back to the same mall where the picture was, it'll be gone, or there'll be a picture but without your parents in it. I think you're glimpsing that other universe, temporarily. This seems to happen frequently enough, but it's not clear what causes it. I do think it's region-specific, but it also depends on the person. The wiring in your brain has to be just right, or you won't see anything. Case File Number 617, written by Cookie Boy. Even extra-dimensional entities need toilet paper. Okay, I just reached up in the closet on the top shelf where we keep our extra toilet paper rolls, and there were 2 rolls left. As I grabbed one, the other one fell and I couldn't reach it fast enough, and as soon as I looked down to pick it up, it was nowhere to be found. I'm talking of a fraction of a second between when it fell and when I looked down for it. I moved everything around there on the ground. It didn't fall into any container or anything like that. I searched for at least 15 minutes and it's just gone. Did I open a portal or is this a glitch in the Matrix? I'm so confused. It has now been 24 hours. I have searched far more than 15 minutes at this point. My girlfriend came home and looked everywhere with me. It's nowhere to be found. It doesn't make any sense. I have now tried politely asking for the roll back, as well as test dropping another roll from the same spot, to no avail. Again, this doesn't make sense. Bonus file, written by Anagram Soup. Symmetry of the beginning and the end. I am not a spiritual person, nor do I believe in the paranormal, but, and it's an interesting but. 3 weeks ago, my cat died in my arms. Our bond was remarkable. I found him as a kitten. He was crossing a dangerous country road, so I stopped, opened my door, and he just jumped into my lap and curled up there. I was his. I'm an animal lover and I've had special pets, but Solomon was almost like a familiar to me. We even had our own special language. The week he died, he went missing on a Monday. I knew something bad had happened because he always came to me when I called him. I searched every square inch of my house, the woods and land around the house, and each neighbor's properties for days. I even arranged to bring in search dogs. I'm telling you, if he was out there, I would have found him, and I was devastated. Then Wednesday came around. Most of the friends and family members helping me search were exhausted and losing hope. Can't lie, I was too. At dusk, I prepared to turn in. My body ached and my spirit was broken, but I was just so damn restless. So, setting out solo for the first time, I leashed up my dog and decided to walk the property one last time. And that's when he found me. I was losing light when I spotted him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on the bank opposite the creek, a place I had already searched a dozen times at least. I called to him and he looked towards me, almost as if he was searching my face to make sure it really was me before responding, and then literally bolted towards the house. Something was strange about this interaction, but we'll come back to that at the end. So I ran back up to the house, went down to the spot where I had seen him, and searched all around the woods with the light I had left. The entire time, though, I felt pulled toward the cellar, another place I had also searched many times. And in the cellar he was. I knew as soon as I started down the steps. He answered my calls this time, the way he always has, but he was not right. He could not move. Turns out he threw a saddle thrombus, a massive blood clot, cutting off all circulation to his hind legs and tail. Solomon could not walk, let alone move or sprint across acres to make it from his spot by the bank to the cellar in just a few minutes between these two encounters. He purred from the moment I picked him up until the very second he threw major clots to his lungs and brain. 3 hours later, he died in my arms. My Solomon found me in the beginning and he found me again at the very end. I cannot explain what I saw or how it happened. When I spotted him by the creek, I found it almost impossible to focus on his face, almost as if I was looking at a poor quality recording of him, and more significantly, his eyes were completely black, not cloudy, his most distinguishing feature. Even the vet agrees that there was no way that it would have been physically possible for him to have run from the spot I saw him all the way to the cellar. I don't understand what this experience was, but I'm starting to believe that he found a way to come back to me as the end was nearing. I will never forget this moment. I miss you, Solomon. Bonus file, written by Drizzly Earth 175. My head disintegrated through my boyfriend's body. I lost my boyfriend a little over 3 years ago in a car accident. I won't bore you with the details. This occurred about 2 days before his funeral, which was a bit less than a week after his death. The visitation and such took a while, since his death was technically suspicious, as he had had no visible injuries externally. Turned out to be blunt force trauma to the head and chest. Anyways, I said I wouldn't bore you with the details, yet here we are. It was like 9 a.m. and I had just gotten up to pee. I laid back down, since I had no business being up that early, and within about 5 minutes I felt something warm against my back. I thought my cat had snuck in while I was downstairs, so I rolled over to kick her out, since if I didn't, she would scratch and meow to be let out within 20 minutes and wake me up. But I rolled over and didn't see my cat. I saw him. He was lying there, pale and flawless in his striped long-sleeve shirt that I still have to this day, and his favorite jeans. He had this blank expression on his face. He didn't look at me, he just stared at the ceiling, almost like a corpse, morbidly enough. I was in utter shock and thought maybe his death really was a dream, like I wished it was for the last week. I went to lay my head on his chest, but he dissolved into thin air and my head hit the bedsheets. I just sat there wondering what the hell just happened before I rolled over and cried myself back to sleep. To this day, I still have no idea what that was. Weirdly enough, after his death, I started experiencing rampant sleep issues, including sleep paralysis, and I wondered if that's what it was. But looking back, I never fell asleep. I lay there for a few more minutes at most and was still fully lucid through the whole experience. Not only that, but I was able to move. I remember vividly rolling over, propping up on one elbow, and going to lay my head down on it. I don't know if I believe in the paranormal or an afterlife, but I never had experiences. Yes, there's more than one, like this, until after his death. Case file number 618, written by MemerBoy18. See, Mom? Studying is dangerous. I, 17 male, was studying in my room with my door locked. I started writing a mock test at 13:46 and started timing my test with my watch's stopwatch. Compared to the previous test that I had attempted, this one was fairly easy. I remember starting question 4 at 14:24 while the stopwatch showed 38 minutes. Question 4 was the easiest in the paper, and it felt like it took 5 to 6 minutes at the most. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. After I got done with the question, I heard my dog barking, which stopped my train of thought. I looked up from the paper, and the time on the clock was 15:32. I checked my stopwatch to confirm whether or not this was a glitch, and it too displayed 1 hour and 46 minutes. This is really freaking me out. Can anyone explain this, or has anyone had a similar experience? To note, I do have narcolepsy, and at first I thought that this was just another episode. But I always remember waking up from my episodes. This time, I was fully awake and aware of my surroundings the entire time. Also, this may be unrelated, but I took the second dose of the vaccine today. I reluctantly spoke to my mom about my experience, and as I expected, she was very skeptical. However, I want to share that she mentioned talking to me through the door, asking me to give my dog lunch at around 15:15. According to her, I yelled back, "No!" I do not remember this exchange of words at all, and it's quite confusing because A, my mom hardly has to remind me to feed my dog. I've had her for around 6 years now, and I feed her at around 3, pretty much on autopilot. And B, she said that she was conducting an online yoga class, she's a yoga instructor, from 2 to 3, and that I was sitting in the living room until 2, which is impossible since I was studying in my room at the time. What is going on? Case notes, file number 618. So as you mentioned, you have narcolepsy. The logical thought here then is that you did blank out, even if it's unusual for you to do so without remembering yourself waking up. Though the strange aspect is your mom saying that you were in the living room during this episode. According to her, you were in the living room until 2. I'm not that well versed on narcolepsy, but I always thought of it as sudden sleep syndrome, basically. I suppose it's not impossible to have narcolepsy combined with sleepwalking. It sounds like it'd be exceptionally rare, but not inconceivable. As far as the glitch explanations go, none come obviously to mind. I mean, for aliens, the time of day doesn't match, and your mom did notice you still there during the time anomaly. So unless an alien is abducting you and then replacing you with a clone temporarily. I am a bit at a loss here, because the time this happened, coinciding with your mom seeing you beforehand, and after, with you saying no to feeding the dog during the event, well, the only thing I can conclusively say is it's probably not aliens. Creepy file number 20, written by Amanda Can 77. It's good practice to make sure people have feet. So this happened almost 10 years ago. But it still gives me creeps whenever I think about it. I was finishing college, living back with my parents in our sleepy little town, and had rekindled an old friendship from high school to pass my days. Madison was a chill girl, and I got along pretty well with her boyfriend and brothers, so I ended up spending a fair amount of time over at her place. Madison's mom was a nurse who enjoyed training for marathons, so if she wasn't at work, she was usually out running. Her dad, on the other hand, was off on disability and home every day, except for delivering the paper around the neighborhood at around 4 a.m. Through passing conversation with Madison, I learned he had been a professor before going off work, but I didn't feel it was my place to inquire any further than that. He was never anything but pleasant to me during our interactions, but I was always struck with the notion that he seemed very distracted by something, as if there was always another conversation happening that he needed to return to. My parents are the type who always have questions about my friends, even if I was a 22-year-old college student, so I filled them in on what I knew and where I had been spending my afternoons. My mom asked me if I knew what her dad was off on disability for. I told her I did not, at which point my dad piped up and said he believes he deals with some mental illness. He then gently explained that he had responded to a 911 call with the volunteer fire department to go retrieve Madison's father out of the garage after a failed suicide attempt. My heart went out to everyone involved, and my questions surrounding her dad were satisfied. I continued hanging around Madison and her family for the rest of the summer, never having any issues besides a hangover the next day. One night we were all over at Madison's house celebrating someone's birthday, I think. Everyone was congregating in the kitchen, sharing snacks, drinking wine, dancing. Even Madison's parents were down and having a good time with us. Her dad came over to me calmly with his drink and asked if he could speak to me in the other room just off the kitchen. I agreed and followed him, thinking he was probably going to ask me to move my car. When we got into the other room, I could see the concerned look on his face and became a little worried, hoping I hadn't done something wrong. "Amanda, I don't mean to scare you, but my paper route is through your neighborhood, and I saw something the other night while I was heading down your street. I noticed a man coming towards me on the other side of the road. I don't usually see anybody else out that early, so I was a little surprised, but as he got closer, I noticed he had no feet. He made eye contact with me as he said the last part, and I could tell he was being serious. I had no idea what to do, and I just froze, and he just floated on past," he said with a dramatic arm wave. He then began to shake his head as if saying no. "Anyways, I think it's a reaper, and I thought you should know." He made eye contact again, but smiled sweetly. I picked up my jaw off the floor and managed to thank him for letting me know. He nodded dutifully and went back into the other room, rejoining the party. I told Madison about it later on in the evening, just so that she would know what was going on with her dad. She seemed embarrassed, but not surprised by this information, and told me to ignore her dad because he was crazy. Her dad carried on as usual around me after that and never brought it up to me again. After I finished college and moved out, Madison and I sort of lost touch. I really don't think about her that often. I do, however, always check to make sure people have feet when I'm out walking in the early morning hours. Creepy file number 21, written by ggrriiffiinn. Did you miss me? So when I was about 11, I would love to ride my bike. I could do it for hours. One day I decided to go to the forest. It was near the village I was living in, 1 kilometer away. Around 40 meters away from it, I noticed something. It was something white in the grass on the left side of the road under a rock. There was a piece of paper with a rock on it, and on the paper was written with charcoal, "Hello." As a dumb kid, I came back the next day. The paper piece was still there, but when I got there, I also had a piece of paper with the word "Hi." Then I came back the next day too, and it was written on it, "How are you?" I had a paper and a pen with me, and I wrote back, "I'm good, you?" Things were going really well. Once, I tried staying there the entire day and night to find out who was the dude that was writing those. I told my parents I would stay with a friend. It was in vain. No one came. Time passed and we became really good friends. We would have conversations and we grew really close. One day, not intentionally, we just stopped talking. I came to the place less and less until I stopped. In the last letter, I remember the last thing he wrote was, "Gonna miss you." Around 20 years passed, I'm 32, and I found a note written on paper with charcoal with a rock on top of it in the front of my house. Missed me? So this is my most sincere what the hell. No one knew about that, so how the hell could this be a prank? What the hell? One day passed. I took the paper inside my house, left it inside my drawer. I'm not sure how to feel about this, but I am somehow happy as long as he's not some evil murderer. I don't think he is. Any thoughts are welcome. Case file number 619, written by Lemiz. The Mile High Glitch. To set the background, my wife and I were sitting towards the back of the plane on a full flight from Denver to Atlanta last night. We had swapped seats so I could be on the aisle, since I have long legs. About 2 hours into the flight, a stewardess arrives with a drink cart. I asked about their beer selection and asked for the IPA before getting out my phone for contactless payment. This is where things start to get weird. The stewardess sees I have my payment card ready and asks for my name, all while pulling out a device with the seating chart. I say my first name and spell out my last name. She's starting to look very confused and asks me for my name again, so I slowly spell out my last name for her. The stewardess continues to click on her device with a really confused look on her face. At the same time, my wife and I are confused why it would matter if I planned to pay directly. So my wife jumps in and mentions that the two of us had swapped seats. Maybe that was causing the confusion? It's at this point that the stewardess explains that she thinks she may have already charged me. She says that a gentleman further up in the cabin had given her the same name. Well, I have a common first name. I have an extremely rare last name. I've done searches and there are about 50 people in the US with my last name. At that I chuckle and mention how I've never even met someone else with the same last name. But she still looks confused and starts apologizing to me, insisting that she thinks she may have already charged me. To make it even weirder, she then adds that the other guy had also ordered the same IPA and also mentioned something about swapping seats. She apologized again a couple more times, gave me my beer for free, and also gave my wife a free wine for the inconvenience. The whole exchange left us completely befuddled. I even checked my credit card statements this morning to see if this mystery person had somehow put a charge on my card, but nothing showed up at all. Case notes, file number 619. At first I figured this was going to be a time loop glitch for the stewardess, where she had actually taken your order, confused the seats, and then it reset from her perspective, but not on the ordering or device system. But you said your card wasn't charged, so that's odd, and maybe that's not what happened. Similar to how Nicolas Cage's character in Next works. He basically can witness a future that doesn't really happen, but it does in his mind and he remembers it. So a sort of prediction system. I'm guessing as the plane debarked, you tried to find the other couple that evidently had the same name as you, but you couldn't find them. Maybe it was a 1 in a billion coincidence. They weren't doppelgangers or lookalikes, just similar people with similar mannerisms and preferences and names. Frankly though, that strikes me as far less likely than a parallel universe perception glitch. When it comes to parallel universes, there are two types of events. A crossover, where you actually physically go there and usually stay there, or a vision of it, simply seeing it as reality for a moment or two, then hopping back, or rather being pulled back by something. Perhaps this happened for the stewardess. She saw a parallel version with you both in it, virtually identical, took your order there, then eventually her perception returned to the original universe with the real you in it. This would explain her confusion and also how your card wasn't charged. She was certain she did charge it because she did, just not to her you. Case file number 620, written by Blue Fox, 1771. The Quantum Stick. This happened years ago, but I don't talk about it because people usually assume I'm misremembering or making it up. I grew up in a tiny house with a big yard as one of several brothers. One day, my brothers, some friends and I were all hanging out in the yard, roughhousing and being rowdy. 6 of us in total, counting myself. My older brother and I were stick fighting with some old 1 1/4 inch wooden dowels. Now, my older brother had a bad habit of being a bit impulsive, and sometimes had trouble keeping the stick fighting at what you'd typically consider normal play levels of intensity. In this particular instance, he figured if he swung it hard enough, he could knock mine out of my hands and win. I saw him reeling back for a full-on baseball swing, so I winced and put my stick out to block as best as I could and waited for the impact. I heard the whoosh of the swing, but it never landed. He was staring dumbfounded at the stick and then me. It had passed cleanly through my stick and my body without touching either. This was a 5-foot piece of dowel, and he was standing 2 feet away from me. I was dead center in the middle of his swing arc, and there was absolutely no way that he had just missed. Everyone else saw it too. The conversation all immediately stopped as all 6 of us stood frozen, stunned by what we just witnessed or experienced. We all just sort of put the sticks down and wordlessly went inside, not sure how to process this. Over the next few years, it came up in conversation among the people who were there, so I know I'm not just misremembering it. I may have had my eyes closed, but even the most credible of my friends confirmed that he was watching when it happened. and has no idea how it happened. He works for a space agency these days and is not the kind of person to make things up. Bonus file, written by Luna Lover. A wish granted. I had always believed in paranormal activity to some extent growing up. Ghosts and demons, But I never believed in curses. I always thought you had to be dead to deal with the supernatural. I was abused regularly as a child, and I remember always wanting to know when it would happen next, but I never told anyone. Mostly because I thought they would kill me and wanted to know before. On this particular night, I was locked in the garage. I was so tired since I had to stay up for days, but I was without food, so I did my normal routine and snuck out to find food. I often ate bugs. I know, judge me all you want, but they kept me from being hungry. They were difficult times. When I went to pick up this specific bug to eat it, it bit me instead, so I let it go and went back inside, as I'd already eaten a bit and luckily found a sandwich that was trashed. When I got back in, I remember being instantly tired and laying down on the ground, falling asleep. I was no more than 6, but remember vividly I'd woken up but couldn't move, and a voice spoke to me. It was a simple question: do you want help? I wasn't sure what it meant, and I couldn't move, but the thing approached me. It stood over me and asked again, do you want help? It asked me if I was hungry and why I wasn't loved. I didn't know. I stayed in this dreamlike state for a while as the creature asked me questions. After a while, I felt myself waking up and it asked me again if I wanted help. It asked me if I wanted to prevent it, so I said yes. When I fully woke up, I was starving, which was odd. After a while, I thought I dreamt it, and when I checked my hand for a bug bite, I didn't have one. So I assumed I just dreamt it up and never actually ate last night. A couple of days went by before I was locked without food again and went to eat bugs, dig through the trash, etc. After I ate a certain bug, I knew something was wrong. It just didn't taste good, and it had a ton of liquid in it. I ignored it until I finished my dinner and went back inside, then lived my normal life. Suddenly, when things happened, I had déjà vu. I didn't know what it was at the time, but as time flew by, I discovered it, and I'd always think of that dream I had. The abuse never stopped though, not until many years later. There were times I should have died, but I got by just fine somehow. I didn't have to eat bugs much longer though. I was eating leftovers, or my siblings snuck me food. Fast forward, I recently got in a car crash, and right before, for whatever reason, I leaned to the other side of the car and got a huge sense of déjà vu again. I knew exactly how it went. I memorized everything the doctor said to me, the car that hit us, and the food I got after. In the short while I was unconscious, that same figure visited me. He said the deal was made and left. If I hadn't have moved, I would have been blinded by the glass and my leg would have been jammed by the car. Ever since that, I hadn't had any déjà vu and feel like a piece of me is missing. Honestly, I'm not sure what the figure got out of it, but I'm sure that was what saved me. I've wanted to find it again, but I'm not sure it would have left if it hadn't have gotten what it wanted. I've tried looking into it, but I just keep getting that it was just a dream and you had a lucky break, or thank God, but I feel it was something more. Case file number 621, written by Outride 2000. She knew my brand of underwear. So, a few years ago, this girl from college, we'll call M, texted me out of nowhere. Told me she was getting divorced from her husband that she met junior year in college. She and I graduated 15 years ago, approximately. That led us to grabbing a drink and then going back to her place, and we hooked up. After we were both done, she said, just like I remember. I said, what do you mean? She said it was just like even better than when we hooked up in college. I told her we never hooked up in college. We didn't even really hang out, save for a couple of classes we took together. She was offended and started saying, how come I don't remember when we first made out after this guy's party off campus? I told her I remember that party, but that she ended up going back home with the guy that became her husband, and that was mostly the extent of our interaction. She says, no way, and goes on to describe my dorm room in detail, even though I have no recollection of her ever going back there with me. She said she spent a lot of time there our senior year and invited me to all these parties where we would sometimes hook up after. I was dating someone else my senior year and knew which party she was talking about, but I never went to them. Every time I suggested she's thinking about someone else, she would describe something extremely specific about me and my life then that nobody would know unless I told them and or one could see. For example, what brand of underwear I used to wear, things I like to do in bed. We followed our memories and they diverged when we first met. I remember thinking she was super hot, but wouldn't give me the time of day. She says we hit it off immediately and sat together the rest of the semester. Same class, same professor, same time. I'm pretty sure she must have jumped timelines at some point. Case notes, file number 621. So a parallel universe switcheroo makes the most logical sense here. It's an effect attributable to so many glitches. So much so that it's barely considered a glitch in my mind. No more than an apple falling to the ground is a glitch of gravity. It's just a force of nature, one we haven't studied that well. We just don't have the equations yet to describe how it functions, because replicating it is almost impossible within the same universe. The only surefire way to produce it is death, and sorry, I won't volunteer for that even though I'm confident in this hypothesis. I wonder who died though, you or her? Who was still in their original universe? Another thing I wonder about in quantum immortality, when we die of old age. What happens then? If every other copy of ourselves in every other parallel universe has died, we're the last one, the oldest, and perish from old age, then are we finally truly dead? Does life reset and we're born again as a baby? Reincarnation of sorts? Do we wake up in the real world and select a new character, a new scenario? To be honest, I hope it's the latter. So many possibilities. Case file number 622. Written by Ruby T59. When you're on TV, but you wish you weren't. This happened 2 years ago when I was staying with my sister, brother, and his girlfriend. It happened pretty quickly. My brother, sister, and I were all on the bed watching Rick and Morty on Hulu when the TV turned black. I thought it was a server lag or iffy TV, but after a brief second, I saw myself in the TV. It was almost like the whole TV screen was recording all of us sitting and watching it. After another brief second, it went away, and the show started again. I was surprised and scared at what happened and turned to see their reactions, but they hadn't seen it. I tried to explain what I saw, but after seeing their reactions, I stopped trying. Then it got weirder. A couple weeks later, I was home with my brother's girlfriend and sister. We started talking about something that must have been relevant to what happened, sending shivers down my spine as she told her story. I wanted to crawl away from the exact TV in front of us. She told me that, which later I found out happened 4 days after my incident, that when she was watching a show on Hulu, the screen cut off and she saw herself. She was so shocked and surprised that she didn't think anyone would believe her until I told her it happened to me too. My sister had started getting freaked out about the event and didn't want us to talk about it anymore, and we still don't when she's around. To this day, we debate ideas about what it was and if it really happened. Now that we both have different accounts of the same glitch, I wonder if it's happened to anyone else or if it can be explained. Case file number 623, written by Junior Ad 7061. Floor 9 isn't Floor 9. This happened during Ramadan in 2017, when me and my family went for a vacation in Dubai. My sister chose a hotel for which we would stay in for a couple of weeks, and everything looked decent. I don't really remember the name of the hotel, but it was a 3 to 4 star hotel with good food and amazing service. Now to the story. The city was beautiful, and there was so much to do, but during our stay in Dubai, me and my family were all fasting, and with that, not much could have been explored, but we still made the best out of it. Our second week of the vacation was a casual day of fasting, and breaking the fast was around the evening. My family wanted to go to the city for the night and have fun, but I wanted nothing less than to chill. I'm not a fan of Dubai's heat, and this heat was killing me. Once I left, I got really bored after some time alone in the room, so I left the hotel and wandered around the area, and I really liked the environment. After some time wandering, I went back to the hotel. Once I got to the hotel and greeted the guy behind the reception, I steadily went for the elevator and pressed number 9 to the hotel room. This is where it gets very weird. On the 9th floor, there are 8 hotel rooms and an air freshener on the right side once you get off the elevator, but the air freshener is gone. I thought to myself, okay, they must have taken it away, I guess. As I walked to the room, my keycard wouldn't open, and after several tries I just gave up and looked around to see if I was on the right floor. Everything, and I mean everything, indicated that I was on the 9th floor. Elevator indication was on 9, all hotel rooms on that floor started with 9, and I remember looking at my hotel room and seeing the correct numbers on the door. That's when I realized that it was too quiet. So very quiet that hearing the very fabric of the carpet I was standing on was the only thing making a sound. I picked up my phone and the last message I received was from my sister saying, "We're at the hotel room, half an hour ago." But I had no reception on the phone. I couldn't remember if I once lost reception in the hotel, but it happened just then. At this point, I was very confused and somewhat startled, so I started knocking on the door to the hotel room, but nothing happened. No sound on the other side, no nothing. I started banging and still nothing happened. I remember our neighbors and how nice they were, so I went for their door to see if someone would answer, and still no one was there. No sound. This is where I panicked. I started banging on every door on the 9th floor and I still couldn't get a response from anyone. At this point, the only thing moving and making a sound was me. I placed my ear on every door. All I could hear was abstinence. I felt so alone and wanted nothing to do but to get back to my family, and then my dumbass thought of the elevator and sprinted my way to it and pressed the ground floor. I made it down and saw the receptionist, and I haven't been so happy to see another human like I was at that moment. I went back to the elevator, but this time I took the one to the right instead of the left like I did before. Press 9, and as soon as I stepped off, I saw the air freshener to the right and my neighbor leaving their hotel room while I was making my way to my door. Before using my door keycard, I heard my family behind that door, and the happiness that struck me was overwhelming to the point that I was about to shed some manly tears. Unlocked it and went straight to bed. If this wasn't a switch of dimensions, I don't know what it was. Bonus file, written by Hold the Choke. We couldn't see our friends anywhere. I went over to a coworker's house after they finished work. A few other people from work were going to meet us there as well. I was the first to arrive by several minutes. The host showed up and both of us went inside. The other coworkers were right behind her. The host and I were there for quite a while when we both were questioning where the others were. That's when her dog started barking at the door. We opened it up and nobody was there. There was nobody in sight. We were confused, but cleaned up for a little bit while we waited. Then sat down and finally looked at our phones. Several missed phone calls and text messages. Apparently, around the time the dog was barking, they were knocking on the door furiously. We verified they went right to the door. They heard the dog barking, but we never heard them knock or ring the doorbell, despite being right next to it. We didn't even see their car when we opened the door. It was so strange, and I can't help but wonder what the hell happened. Case file number 624, written by Leia. I willed myself into another universe. I was renewing our car insurance the other day, and I freaked out when I saw our policy with the wrong number plates on. I called my husband over to have a look, and he said that our number plate has always ended with 342. It hasn't. I'm so certain of this, I will die on this hill. The technique I always used to remember our number plate was that the last 3 digits halved each time. It used to be 421. I vividly remember this. We've had this car for 5 years, and whenever I fill in paperwork that requires the number plate, I remember the halving thing to get it right each time. I am so annoyed and so frustrated by this. My husband thinks I'm insane and has just laughed it off, saying I must be remembering an old car. I'm not. What makes this even weirder, the other day I did a meditation where you chant, "Tomorrow I will wake up in my best timeline." And well, now this happened. I did this meditation not really believing it would work. I don't even know if it has, but I'm extremely scared and creeped out. I haven't noticed anything else changing. Case notes, file number 624. Interesting. This brings up a question I never even thought to ask myself. Would we be able to use our own will to push our sentience into another universe? Could we command the server to abide by our bidding through active thinking, similar to using a command prompt on a computer to dictate what program to use next or perform other functions? Everything I've read so far is that quantum immortality is programmed to trigger when you die, but it's not inconceivable then that the mechanic exists, so maybe we can will it to some extent. Maybe we do it all the time without even realizing. Contingent, of course, on this all being a simulation. In my opinion, that's the most likely scenario going on right now. Some might say that life is a test. Hey, it could be. Maybe we're constantly tested in various scenarios to determine our moral fiber. Or maybe this is some long-term IQ test from the real universe. Maybe we're applying for some job there, and this is the best way they have to test if we're any good. If so, figuring out that there's a multiverse out there and that we can switch between it on a whim, maybe that's part of the test. I can imagine it now in the real world. When you discovered this feature, an achievement pop-up was unlocked. You've discovered the multiverse. Congrats. Case file number 625, written by Iravi Kutan Pillai. The records no longer exist? It all feels very strange, and I'm seriously doubting my own consciousness. I am an Indian working in Saudi Arabia for the last 9 years, and haven't been able to take a vacation for the last 4 years, working continuously, because of the virus restrictions more recently. When I reached India last week after a long journey, I called my friends to meet at our usual fast food joint. We were talking about so many things. I was trying to catch up with what's happening around our locality. Then I proceeded to ask them about a new football turf I saw on the way and suggested we should play there sometime. My friends agreed to that, with a puzzled expression. I started to ask them about our local football club. Are they still using the orange jersey like they used to? Who is still playing in the team? Which tournament did we play last? They did answer all these questions, but at the end they asked me why I'm talking about football. I laughed at them and said because we love football, and I, along with another one of our friends, were the only local boys who used to play for the club when they participated in big tournaments. Then I reminded them how big the celebrations for the 2010 Football World Cup were in our village. They looked at each other, laughed at me, and said I've gone mad. I kept telling them about some tournaments and how I'm certain other players performed, and some other specific examples. Their reaction was the same as before. According to them, I was never into football, and I have never even been an average player. And some of the incidents I mentioned did really happen, but I was never a part of it. Now I'm pissed and confused at the same time. I know I was a good player. I know I played for that club, but these bastards keep telling me I wasn't. But there's one other thing. I know I played for my college team, and there's one guy from my place who was in my senior year in college. He must have known about me or at least seen me playing for the college team. So I asked my friend to call this guy to arrange a meeting to discuss football with me. He answered the phone, and like all my other friends, he said he had never seen me play football. But I have something else to prove my point. Photos. I uploaded some of the college team photos from the past when we won a tournament. I proceeded to open my Facebook and scroll through the photos. Scrolling down and down and down, there's no freaking photo. I clearly remember the photos with our real Madrid jersey, but it wasn't there. We decided to end this conversation there and I left for home. I was confused, but didn't talk to anybody about this. The next morning, I got a call from our courier services for the package I had sent from Saudi Arabia. Then I remembered something. I had sent my football shoes in that package. I used to play near my company camp with the same shoe. I received the package, took it home, opened it, and what the hell? There are no football shoes in there. Now I'm seriously pissed and called my company, and they said they have never seen me playing football. Called my college friends, they never saw me playing football. Asked my family, same answer. I am pretty damn sure what I think about me is real. I know it's only been a week, but I think everybody around me has gone through some eternal sunshine crap and their mind got erased or something. Or I'm in deep trouble and need help. My mother gave me a bunch of dresses which, according to her, I left here when I went back to Saudi Arabia 4 years ago. Guess what? I have no recollection of owning that bunch of dresses. It somewhat fits me given it's 4 years old, and as far as I remember, I use ready-made shirts. All the shirts she has given me are tailor-made, which is very unlike me. I went to the turf with my friends. There were a bunch of guys warming up to play. Some of them I knew before, had a little chat and joined them and demolished the game. I was seriously doubting myself before, but not anymore. My skills are undeniable. I know who I am, and I know what I'm saying is true. The frustrating part is that my friends who were there with me said that I must have been playing with some Saudi guys for the past 4 years to be this good now. They still don't believe me. Lots of people recommended that I consult a doctor, which made me remember one incident that happened while I was on the college team. It was a training session, and I fell down while controlling the ball. The guy next to me tried to clear the ball, but he missed it and kicked me in the ribs. I shrugged it off and kept playing. After the session, we were changing to leave. I felt a pain in my ribs and I called my trainer. He called an ambulance and I was admitted to the hospital. They were doing some tests. Don't remember the names, but it had the clip-like thing attached to my finger. I was fine, but they wanted me to be in observation for 24 hours. I remember my father and uncle being there after I informed them. I remember my college friends being there on the next day. Sadly, as I expected, when I asked, nobody remembered anything. Went to the hospital to check the records. No records exist. Case file number 626, written by Spaced Out Dreamer Boy, the air-conditioned Crowbar. So we have this little metal tool that we use to unlock any of the doors in our house if they have been accidentally locked from the inside. The only way I can describe it is that it looks like a tiny crowbar, hook at one end, flat head at the other. We've been keeping this tool in the cabinet area above our air conditioner. Well, around 2 months back, I had accidentally shut my bathroom door with the lock engaged. I went to grab the tool to unlock the door like always, and it was gone. I checked all around the cabinet and the floor, but it was nowhere. Even checked the tops of the door frames where it used to be, but nope, tool just disappeared. None of us really thought anything of it. Things got lost all the time, and we eventually found another tool that looked different from the original to replace it. Well, today, around 2 hours ago, my mom had opened that air conditioner cabinet for something, and lo and behold, there was the original tool in its original place. She was so confused. I laughed about it, telling her that it was a glitch in the Matrix. She's not really a believer of things like glitches, but I'm a big fan of glitch stories, so knowing she experienced a glitch along with me was amusing, and here we are. Case file number 627, written by Multi Frasper, When the Dark Sky Holds a Concert. This was captured during a cold night on the 24th of January, 2020. At around 10:30 p.m. I was doing my mandatory military service in the Finnish Defense Forces as military police, and during the time I captured this clip, I kept watch at one of the checkpoints that leads to the military base or garrison, whatever you call it. The clip is captured with the phone I had back then, a Huawei P20 Pro, and I recorded it to Snapchat in order to send it to my buddies so they could go out and listen to the sound too. The sounds continued for approximately 45 minutes to approximately 11:15 p.m. When the sounds started to vanish, it felt like it was getting quieter with each noise it made. It wasn't sudden, unlike when it started. I don't really know when it did start, because I was inside our security booth, but when I heard it, I rushed outside to check it out and listen. My pal was with me and noticed it too. After the noises ended, I didn't hear them again. I remember someone telling me they heard the same noises exactly the day before, around midnight. I wasn't there then to witness it, unfortunately. About the area of the incident, the base itself was quiet back then because the time was close to midnight and there wouldn't be any action at that time, and if there were, then we'd most certainly know about it, no doubt. There is, however, a town or city you could almost say, close by, approximately 1.5 kilometers away. The city is technically a ghost town around this time, and even during rush hour, it's really nothing special. Very quiet and kinda eerie place, I'd call it. There is a central fire station nearby, but that's unlikely the source of the sound. Also, some rural industries are located nearby, but again, those are most likely not very active around that time, midnight. If I had to guess where the source of this is coming from, it'd be the big water tower located just across the road from the base. It's mostly made up of concrete. It hasn't been making any noise before though, and during the time I filmed this, it wasn't that windy at all. But maybe someone knows more about water towers than I do? Also worth mentioning is that a one-track railroad is located quite close. But as far as I know, no cargo is transported on this, only during specific times. A rural rail bus line will be driving here, and it certainly wouldn't make this noise. A small bay is located on the other side of the base, but only small motor and sailboats are able to operate in these waters, and during this time of the year, I don't think anyone would be riding there in pitch black darkness. No attempt could be made to debunk it simply because I couldn't leave my post and it was extremely hard to locate the sound. It did sound like it was coming from the woods, but that's a risky bet to make. A lot was spoken about the incident the next day, but it was a mystery that never, as far as I know, returned. I'm not serving in the military anymore because I was moved to the reserves, but it'd be fun to know if those people serving there now have been hearing stuff like this. Who knows? Case notes, file number 627. I listened to this clip. Creepy is the first word that comes to mind. Then, unsettling. The best way I'd personally describe it is as a sort of muffled, distorted train horn. But train horns are far louder and persist for longer. Actually, it sounds a little similar, but also more quiet than the sky trumpets that you hear about. There's no real explanation for those either. The only mundane explanation I could go with would be some type of glitched out train passing by. Although, as you say, freight trains didn't travel on that rail line, unless there was some type of rare exception. Which, if that is the case, it could explain why it was never heard again. But it wouldn't explain why the sound is so diffused if the rail is close by. There's a rail line 2 kilometers away from me, and whenever freight passes through, it's so loud I can feel my house walls vibrate slightly. All these sound glitches fascinate me. The hum, or sky trumpets, or this, because everyone hears it, or most people are able to hear it. Sometimes some people aren't, and it's usually not a high-pitched sound, so it's not related to old age. I think for the hum, they've even been able to measure it instrumentally, but some people still can't hear it. And they've never been able to determine where it's coming from. Bonus file, written by D615, The Vintage Dress. Long story short, my mom passed away recently in my home country. My notoriously hard to shop for sister, also in my home country, went to a modern department store to buy mourning wear. A fellow customer, just like a younger version of my mom, overheard her talking to the saleswoman and immediately stepped in and found her a blouse in her size, the kind my mom used to buy for her 35 years ago on overseas trips. Few key points. The department store is recently built and very contemporary. They do not have any vintage stock, the way Neiman M or Nordstrom don't have forgotten items from the 80s and 90s hiding out in the racks. This is a vibrant, exclusive store with quick turnarounds and lots of employees. The cream and white tops looked pristine. The department store is a standalone, not a part of a chain or revamped old business. In my home country, vintage is stigmatized. An upscale department store wouldn't want to besmirch their reputation by selling vintage items, even allowing for the very minuscule probability that this was some decades-old leftover stock from a supplier. They fit my sister perfectly. The fellow customer had just reached out into the racks and pulled them out, only knowing the color, but no other specifications. After the funeral, I went to the store and met a floor manager, in the hopes of buying more items like this for my sister. This was a week after my sister was there. He called up at least 5 sales personnel from the floor. No one could remember having these items. The department store has multiples of pretty much everything in different colors and sizes. Because these are the types of blouses she likes, my sister is always actively on the hunt for them. She's been unsuccessful for 30 plus years. If it's some kind of resurgence trend, there will be plenty of other similar items. When I visited the store with my sister, she insisted we could leave out the back entrance. I argued with her that the security won't let customers exit through the back. I was right, it's narrow and very heavily guarded. My sister was quite certain it was possible because a lady who selected the tops for her had disappeared out through the back. When handing the items to my sister, the lady had said something verbatim my mom always told my sister when getting dressed for a special event. It's like a young version of my mom shows her dress. Bonus file, written by Lemonade Robot, a proper game of Nerf dart. Last October, my friend Tanner died unexpectedly due to causes that can't be mentioned in the sub's rules. I don't need to go into too many details because they're not relevant to the story, but it was easily one of the hardest hitting losses I've ever had. He and I shared a very close and special bond and overcame a lot in life together. He had moved in with our mutual friend, Beth, and her boyfriend several months prior to passing away, so I would constantly come over to hang out with everyone as I lived nearby. One summer day, we all had a giant Nerf gun fight together in their front yard. I distinctly remember making eye contact with Tanner and having a strange gut feeling at the time that this was a bittersweet moment, but brushed it off as being sad that summer was coming to a close. I felt uneasy though, that he had the same sad, longing look in his eyes that I did. It began to get dark out. After collecting as many darts as we could, we headed inside as Tanner declared, "This isn't over yet." A month later, after noticing many strange behaviors, Beth and her boyfriend made the heavy decision to call Tanner's mom and have her convince him to go back to rehab. 3 months later, Tanner was dead. I moved out of state since, but always go back to visit Beth when I'm home. One day after heavy snowfall, I pulled into Beth's driveway. Just as I hopped out of my car, Beth came to the door to greet me. Something yellow popped out against the fresh snowfall, immediately catching both of our attention. We looked down and directly on our front step, perfectly placed in the untouched snow, was a Nerf dart. Well played, buddy. Well played. Case file number 628, written by Carter Hates Memes. Careful, mate, I say to myself. I have never in my entire life experienced anything remotely like what just happened to me now. And also, I'm not crazy. I finished work at around 10:15 p.m., so it was pitch black, and cycled home. It's roughly a 25-minute cycle back home, and as I got into my little town, I was approaching the crossroads in which I go straight ahead when I'm cycling home. Upon approach to the crossroads, the light is red, but I'm still a good 10 to 15 seconds away from it, so I continue at the speed I'm going. I see another cyclist coming towards me on the other side of the road from the direction I'm headed. They speed over the crossroads. As he is approaching me, I see he's wearing the exact same high-vis helmet and jacket as I am, as well as the same red backpack. By this point, the lights had turned amber and then green, so I thanked my luck for not having to stop and kept going at the same speed I was going at. Just as I was on approach to the green light, this other cyclist was right in front of me, but on the other side of the road, and passing me by. As he passes me, he says, "Careful, mate," in my voice, my exact voice. And also, I'm not from the country I live in, so my accent is very unique and it has the same tone of voice and everything. I stopped my bike and turned around. No traffic behind me as the roads are dead this time of night, and he had vanished, point blank. There was no way he could have turned down a side road or made it so far he was out of sight. He mysteriously vanished. I turned back around to begin cycling again, and all of a sudden, a car sped across the road at double the speed limit, running a red light. If I hadn't have stopped to look at this mysterious person who looked and sounded exactly like me, I'd have been hit side on and likely died. I don't believe in anything supernatural, and I'm not religious, but this is making me question some things. I think if this person hadn't just vanished after the warning, then I could answer it as a very unlikely event that someone who looks and sounds just like me had maybe seen the car approaching. But he vanished. How is that possible? Case notes, file number 628. So I'd scratch out doppelganger here, given the vanishing act he pulled, or you pulled right after the fact. No, I'd guess this is your own spirit protecting you. As you said, had you not slowed down and stopped, You'd have been hit by a reckless driver running that red light, certainly so. This may be even related to multiverse theory. It's conceivable that in one of those universes, everything had led up to where you were, but 5 to 10 seconds ahead. So in that universe, you died, that universe's you's sentience was transposed and then mixed with your own in this universe, your universe. And you see this as yourself cycling by and then mysteriously disappearing. Maybe this is how we consciously process the process of mixing consciousnesses. So when someone else dies in another universe, another you, and they come to this universe, they mix together. I don't think one consciousness supplants the other. I think they combine and merge, like a careful fusion of beautiful ingredients. But of course, from the different memories between yous, there would be some processing required consciously. So yeah, you might visually see this as a glitch, like you yourself cycling against the road and then just vanishing after giving you a warning. This could even explain guardian angels, protective forces that are in fact just us from other universes that are acting after having died there to protect us in this universe where they came to. So if that is true, we are our own guardian angels. That is so cool. Just a theory, but I think it fits pretty well. Bonus file, written by Yozarina, when even the fridge is scared. We sold our house because I think it's haunted. After a few months of us living in this home, which we had planned to use as our second home, we have decided to sell it after some unusual experiences. Our real estate salesperson and the person who bought our home are aware of my claims and have made an informed decision to purchase this home despite my warning. They probably think I'm a nut. The home is not an old one. It was built in 2019, and we are the third owners. We have gotten an air quality test done in the home. Both my husband and I have gotten physical examinations, and nothing out of the ordinary has come out of these tests. Now I will get to my experience. We bought our winter home last year in June of 2021. Originally, we are from Canada, but we have spent the majority of the pandemic between the US and recently Costa Rica. My first experience was while I was taking a shower. The house has an ensuite washroom. When you enter the room, if you go to the left, you will go towards the bathroom. If you go to the right, you will end up in the bedroom. From the shower, you can see the entrance to the bedroom. One afternoon while I was showering, I watched my half-naked husband walk into the bedroom with a glass of lemonade. I then turned around to wash the soap off my face, and then turned back towards the door to rinse the shampoo out of my hair. This is when I saw my half-naked husband enter the bedroom again with the lemonade. When I exited the shower, I asked my husband if he re-entered the room a couple times, and he said he only came into the bedroom once and has been there for the majority of my shower. My husband had a similar experience. He was in the backyard looking into the kitchen. He claimed he saw me leave the kitchen and walk towards the mudroom. He was very confused when he entered the house to find it completely empty, only to find out I had been out for a couple of hours. On multiple occasions, I've heard the sound of my husband's car dragging on the driveway. We have the steepest driveway on the block. Every time he parks in the garage, you hear the distinct sound of the bottom of the car scraping the driveway. When I hear this, I usually unlock the garage door. There have been multiple times where I've heard the sound, unlock the door just to find out he isn't home. We've both heard unexplainable whistling sounds that stop once we acknowledge the sound. I guess it could just be the vents, but for 3 days last week our thermostat stopped working and we still heard the whistling. There have been other trivial occurrences too. I once woke up in the middle of the night because the fridge door alarm was going off. We have those annoying automatic toilets where the lid lifts when it detects motion. Well, those open on their own sometimes. I understand with modern upgrades there are going to be malfunctioning pieces, so I put those experiences under the questionable category. So we've spent the last week packing our things. We are those psychopaths that do not store anything in our garage other than our vehicles. The only other thing that is found in the garage is the water softener tank. That's it. So one lovely night, the car alarm goes off on both vehicles. Convinced that we were being robbed, we call the police, and of course, the neighborhood security also comes by just to see that our cars are perfectly in the garage, with no signs of an intruder. We officially moved out of the house 3 days before closing. We could not bear another day there, and our neighbor texted me to ask what all the commotion was about at our house. I have no idea what she's talking about because we moved out. I may sound like a kook, but we've lived in so many houses and we've never experienced anything like this. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this house was a teardown. There was another house in the same property that I think was built in the 60s. Case file number 629, written by Petal Jane. When Kate's teeth are blacked out, weird stuff happens. I went to my dentist this afternoon. They have a small waiting area split into a larger side with 5 chairs and a coffee table, and a smaller side with 2 chairs and a small end table. I walked through this area to the counter, about 10 steps, and checked in. I then turned around and headed to a chair in the larger area. I noticed a small stack of magazines on the coffee table. The top magazine was the issue of People with Meghan and Harry and Kate and William on the cover. It caught my attention for a few reasons. 1, most medical offices have gotten rid of magazines lately. And 2, someone had blacked out one of Kate's teeth, which struck me as funny as the magazine was in a dentist's office. I briefly considered picking it up, but decided not to as I figured I would only have a few minutes to wait. Well, I ended up waiting over 20 minutes. During this time, I never left my chair. I played on my phone a bit and just sat and looked around the office. I looked at the coffee table and it was totally empty. No people around. There was nothing there that could have moved it. I looked at the other tables and counters and it was not there either. Just poof, gone. I remember the cover so vividly. I even looked it up when I got home and found the issue, March 23, 2020. I really wish I had picked it up now. Case file number 630, written by Video Comprehensive 99. A disappearing object phenomena, but now with an entire mansion. This is my mom's story. We live in a very small town and starting to develop a little bit. We live along one of the main roads in town. The other main road crosses it, and everything is scattered around the different quadrants, like a graph if you will. Instead of traveling down our road, turning right and down the other main road to get to the grocery store, there is this little connector road and new businesses are slowly popping up. A few banks have been built, a feeder supply store, and some type of restaurant looks like it's being built. Street lamps have not been installed yet because of the low traffic, and there's probably 2 stop signs along this approximately 1.5 to 2 mile stretch of road. One night, my mom was going to the grocery store and stopped at the stop sign to turn towards the existing shopping center. She does the whole look both ways before turning, even though there's no reason to be expecting traffic from the right. They're on an empty plot of land where there is no current construction going on. She sees this huge mansion-like house. It had a wraparound porch, beautiful dark brick, all the exterior lights were on. She's floored because it looks like the inhabitants have moved in. When did they even start construction? She gets gas and groceries from this area frequently and has never seen anything happen on this lot. She goes about her business and goes home the same way. She swears she still sees the house. The next day when the sun is out, she goes down the same road, this time to go to her bank, and boom, there's no house. There's no mansion. She looks for it every time she's in that area. Case file number 631, written by Intuitive Authority, The Lost Key. A couple weeks ago, I had gotten the energy to clean up a pile of recyclables in my living room. The space by my front door was open and clear after doing that, nothing on the floor. I finished working and then went to pick up my kids and pick up dinner. We got back home and I sat on the floor by the front door, and my oldest daughter was standing less than a foot from me while my youngest daughter was about 3 feet from me on the opposite side. I made some comments, and then suddenly, my oldest daughter just fell over out of nowhere. There had been a loud metallic sound when she hit the carpet. She's clumsy and trips over nothing all the time. But this time, she hadn't even been moving at all and fell over like she'd been pushed. We had all been laughing because we know her to be extremely clumsy. I asked if she was alright and she was laughing, but shaking her head no and pointing to her knee. I reached over to rub her knee and saw the previously lost bedroom key I had been thinking about earlier in the week right below it. I instantly realized the metallic noise when she fell had been the key. We had only been in the house about 3 minutes before this happened, and she hadn't seen the key before. She didn't know what it was when I showed her. It doesn't look like a regular key. I found the whole thing strange. I went to make sure it wasn't the key I already had. It wasn't, and I put it back where I usually keep it, way down the hallway. I had lost it weeks ago when I dropped it, but it wasn't on the floor. Has this happened to anyone else? Is this key symbolic? Bonus file, written by Bo Delta, my Yemini friend in the afterlife. Twice in my life I've used the Ouija board. The first time I did it, it didn't seem to work that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, but I had my doubts. The answers to the questions were sketchy at best, and not all of them made sense. The one thing that maybe might have proved it was real was that I remember for weeks after we did it, our cat at the time would just sit outside the doorway and stare, right in the direction of where we had set it up. We all noted that it was kinda weird, as he'd never done that before, but he eventually stopped and we forgot about it and moved on. Perhaps we did make a connection, and our setup was just wrong, or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remain largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time, though, was an entirely different outcome. A few years later, I moved across the country to attend university. One day, me and some of my university friends got on the topic of Ouija boards and decided we'd have a crack at it one night. But this time we'd do it properly. One of my friends was quite an esoteric sort of guy, and he did some research on how to properly do it. None of the others besides me had tried Ouija at this point, so we were mostly going in blind. But my friend made us a proper board setup and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies, as he put it. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I will mention here that I was still very skeptical, so I went in with the mindset of carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass at all. But throughout the entire session, the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated, and I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity interacting with us through this entire session. But that wasn't the only reason I started believing. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear and yet so bizarre that I'll remember it forever. One thing my esoteric friend said that was paramount to the experience was courtesy. So we started off basically asking if there were any spirits available to speak to us. And we got a yes. We introduced ourselves and asked if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a bit. Another yes. We apologized for intruding and made it clear that the spirit did not have to answer any questions it didn't want to, and then we began our questioning in earnest. I won't type out a transcript, but here's the basics. The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier, killed in 1984, and he was from Yemen. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or whatever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, and there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell were untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible. I then remember asking if it was a Buddhist style of reincarnation, to which we received a yes and no. I interpreted that as a sort of. After all this, we then decided amongst ourselves to wrap things up, having already had our minds blown away by what we just experienced. We said thanks to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This was an important part according to my friend, as it would allow the spirit to return to its own realm easily. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment and yet also enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I had no reason to believe it was lying to us intentionally, then death was almost something to look forward to. I considered myself a pure atheist up until this point, but this one night rattled that belief so hard that I no longer consider myself as such, and will always have the memory of my Yemini friend to prove otherwise. Case notes, bonus file. Yeah, this was rather touching for a story revolving around death and communicating with the dead. It does make you wonder. I mean, I have so many theories going on in my mind now. I still think quantum immortality is the most likely event when you die, but it doesn't mean it's mutually incompatible with spirits lingering. So what we would consider a spirit traditionally is our soul departing from our body, and I think that's related to us seeing ourselves as our dead state or soon to be dead, so body separation. And then after that, if our body dies, the spirit doesn't perish. It inhabits the body, but it isn't of the body, if that makes sense. And then if you bring in quantum immortality to that, well, how I think spirits are manifested is as your body dies, a part of you, a part of your spirit is imparted into another version of you, a real life you that's corporeal, in another universe, and they merge together. But I think a part of that spirit is still left behind. Maybe a copy is made, or maybe just a part of it is split off. And that fragment, or echo as I like to call it, stays behind, and that's what we call a ghost. And then you also bring in Buddhist reincarnation. Well, I like to think of it this way. Before we existed, we didn't exist. We were in that great nothingness. And yet, from that great nothingness, we then popped into existence. So it only makes sense, it stands in perfect reason that if we did die and there was no quantum immortality or anything like that, then we'd return to this great nothingness where we don't exist. But if we spawned from nothingness initially, then we could do it again later on. I guess there's no guarantee that we wouldn't spawn as a frog or something, or maybe an alien in a distant world. I don't know how it works exactly, but I'm quite convinced that death is indeed not the end. Although I confess that my hope is this is all a simulation, and there's a real world, Matrix style, without the evil machines part of course, that we can awake to. And this is all like a very high-end MMORPG, super hardcore. And we can just decide scenarios to come back into and just play out different roles. Like now, how we'd want to play a video game to experience different things, being a warrior in high fantasy, or living a life just trying to build a house. Whatever it is we want that we haven't experienced yet, we can come back and experience it. Maybe that's why people choose a hard life. They haven't experienced that yet and need that perspective. I don't know, but it's a nice idea. It really is. Case file number 632, written by John Jackman, 1029, 30 Reasons to Never Smoke at Night. One night, I was over at my buddy's house, and we were watching TV. Being bored out of our damn minds for a few hours, we decided to go out for another cigarette or two. As we got outside, we realized that the weather had cleared up. It was sometime in August, so it was warm enough to just hang out and sit outside the window and mess about for a while. After an hour or so, I look at my watch and it's 1:03 a.m. and that's later than I thought it was, so I verify with my phone. I look at my friend and say something along the lines of, "Holy hell, it's already 1:03. Where did the time go?" We just go back to talking and smoking, and 5 or 6 cigarettes later, I look at my watch again. It reads 1 a.m.? This confuses me greatly, as you can imagine. Keep in mind I have a quality analog watch, so it's incapable of adjusting to daylight savings time, which starts in March and ends in November anyways, let alone the date when there's only 30 days in a month, and it wouldn't roll back. Regardless, at this time, I think my watch has malfunctioned, so I look at my phone. It also reads 1 a.m. I told my friend to check his phone. He pulled it out and the look on his face was very concerning. We just sat there and looked at each other in utter confusion, and we were kind of freaked out, especially because we confirmed with each other that it was definitely 1:03 a.m. earlier, and that we'd been chain smoking for at least another half hour. We pondered it for a while, and eventually wrote it off as one of the universe's many mysteries. To this day, I cannot even begin to explain it. Case notes, file number 632. Time resets are probably not related to aliens when you're moving back in time. You'd have lost time forward if it was an abduction, lack of memories of what transpired. By your description, there was nothing in the air, no charge or anything. I recall a case from about a month back where 2 people were in their living room, and then a charge in the air crackled. Something they felt so spectacularly strongly just suddenly appeared. Then time was reset for them a few hours back. Whatever happened in your case had no sensation at all. Does this mean there are multiple methods to travel back in time? Or was it instead a perception glitch? Strikes me more as a latter, to be honest. Messing with time backwards, if truly possible, strikes me as something that would require immense energy. You couldn't do it to someone else without them realizing beforehand that something extreme is happening. Although you did go back in time much less than the other group. Only 30 minutes, not multiple hours. Maybe that does mean there's less energy required. Still, I'm sure you would have felt something beforehand. As far as what could cause perception loss like this, you are only smoking cigarettes, which aren't supposed to induce hallucinations. It can't be a mechanical and electronic glitch at the same time, with your watch and your phone reading the wrong time. Besides, you'd have realized afterwards that it was a tech glitch. So the odds of that are astronomical, that it somehow glitched out and then fixed itself on both your watch and your phone, and your friend's phone too. Case file number 633, written by Angel, the man from the void. I was on probation and not supposed to be smoking, but one day I caved in. I was home alone around lunchtime. I got high and it felt amazing after such a long break. I was listening to the Brockhampton Gold music video on MTV. It felt so surreal. I would get somewhat paranoid around this time, going beyond just probation. I would check the windows and garage sometimes to make sure no one had come home so that I could be assured of my privacy. I went to the living room to peek out the curtains and saw a man standing in the middle of the road. Where my house was is a dead end, so not a very busy area. Only someone lost or looking to make a U-turn or someone living around there should ever be passing by the house. He was just standing there in the middle of the street, in the middle of the giant living room window. He was facing towards the window. He wore a bright orange vest. I was a little spooked out, but figured he was a PG&E worker or something. I didn't see a car around though. I quietly walked back to my room. I crept back to the kitchen, which also had a window facing out towards the same street, and peeked out of the blinds. The man was still there, just standing. Yet this time, he had moved over to his left, now directly in front of the kitchen window. I instantly and quickly went back to my room. I thought and thought about it, without any answers or conclusions or peace of mind. The second I began to forget about it and truly relax, I heard the doorbell. You cannot mistake this doorbell. I believe I also heard the dogs we had barking. I hesitated for the slightest of moments as I put on some pants. I went to the living room to open the door, and as I opened the wooden door and looked through the metal screen gate, I saw the soles of 2 shoes walking away down the driveway. I did not choose to say anything or follow. I peeked out of the windows, blinds, and curtains to see if there was a worker nearby or any sign of a worker's car, or anyone's car, or anything active. But there was simply no one there, and no indication of how anyone could have gotten there. Creepy file number 22, written by No Syllabub, 4264. How a tiny 5-foot girl prevented a burglary. Listening to stories at work made me remember this one occasion back in 2008 or 2009, when I probably scared the crap out of a possible burglar. I lived in an area with lots of damage to livestock by wild animals, and tanning and hunting are normal hobbies here. I have straight, very long hair, which hangs over my face if not tied up. That day, my hair was loosened from my braid and covered most of my face. I, at this point 20 to 21 years old, female, lived alone in a big 2-story house next to a busy road. There was a farm hall next door that had lots of large equipment and machinery standing outside. I often had strange people walking around thinking I owned them, which I didn't. I was a poor student renting a cheap farmhouse. I had just started learning to tan leather and fur and got a raccoon dog under work. It had been shot after killing farm animals, not for the fur. I got it to practice. It was too warm summer for this, and the skin had started to smell bad very quickly, so my sense of humor was kind of on its last brink. I had several knives to try, starting from the biggest possible, of course. I was tiny, 5 foot tall and skinny. Working with carcasses took a lot of strength. While trying to hurry, I saw a white van stop on a bus stop along the road. A lone man came out and walked right through my shrubs towards me, and tried with broken English to tell me he had to get inside. I'm not in an English-speaking country, and this is quite a known trick scammers use to find valuables to steal later, so I got scared. My door was unlocked and I didn't want him to go inside, but had no way of stopping him if he tried. In my panicking mode, I just stared at him from under my long, greasy and sweaty hair and kept skinning the smelly carcass while keeping eye contact as well as I could. He stuttered that his phone died and he needed to charge it. I took my oversized knife and with it I pointed at an outlet right behind him on the outer wall, never said a word, and kept cleaning off the skin. The guy let his phone charge for a while, called someone very fast in a language I didn't recognize, and went to his van, again walking right through my shrubs that I had had problems keeping alive. In a short moment, he came back with an empty bottle, saying he needed water for the broken car. Again, without speaking, I pointed at a tap on the outer wall, using the knife like a finger, staring all the time and kept skinning. He took some water and went to his car again. Third time he came back, just to ask if he could wait inside for a friend to pick him up, as his car was done for. I didn't say a word, just shook my head while cleaning and now finally loosening the skin. He stood there for a moment, then said he'll just wait in the car. I nodded for a goodbye and kept working, noticing his stare on my knife before he walked away. After 10 or so minutes, the van sped away. I finally took a long breath and hoped that the guy was too focused on my knife to understand I was terrified, having heard in the news of a foreign burglar trying to get to people's houses and driving a white van. Now thinking it from his point of view, driving around in a foreign country, stopping to do some work, and meeting this tiny woman in dirty clothes and long hanging dirty hair, skinning a smelly raccoon dog with an oversized knife, probably looking like the girl in The Grudge. In his shoes, I wouldn't have come back either after the first attempt. Case file number 634, written by XXXXXX. Top 10 Shadows. I was very spiritual at this time. I lived on a street that had a house numbered 1666. It was creepy as you would imagine. A lonely rusted swing set outside, faded pink paint, and a parched lawn. I never saw any activity at this house. Further up the street was an address which also coincidentally had all the numbers completely gone off the mailbox, except for the number 6. The landlord I rented with at this place was also very creepy, as was the roommate he later rented out to, but that's its own story. A few incidents happened while living in this area. Firstly, the lights on the property were automatic, but would turn on for seemingly no reason, with perfect timing. For example, going to the bathroom at 3 a.m. and having it lit perfectly, or coming home late at night and having the gate light turn on for me before I even drew near it. Okay, to be fair, these are small incidents. As I mentioned, I was very spiritual and interested in the paranormal at this time. I went out one night intending to meet someone, this intention being purely in my head and mind, never having made plans physically with any person. I went out late at night and walked down the street. It was quiet and empty. As I turned right, and just off the street I lived on, I saw a shadow in the middle of the street. It was someone quietly coasting and making their way down the street. I kept walking as they passed me. I continued walking up for a while and turned around. I hadn't seen anyone else. I walked home, and just as I was turning left to go back onto my street, I looked behind me and saw a shadow on a bicycle making its way down the street again. I looked back and stared at it. I kept walking onto my street. I heard the bicycle approaching behind me. I did meet someone that night. On various other occasions did I also go out, times without intending to meet anyone, and come across this same person in the same manner, just meeting up out of the blue. Or coincidentally, he was an Aries sun and I'm an Aries moon. On another occasion did I put the intention in my mind to meet someone. I went out at night again and met someone sitting alone in the park. He was also an Aries sun. We did not remain in contact. After this, I would see him when I went out in the daytime. It was like we were bumping into each other out of the blue or coincidentally. There were never any plans. I would see him in the distance crossing the street, different times of the same day and different days. Once I was with him with 2 other people as we walked down the street. I saw him approaching in a hoodie with his head down. As we passed, he seemed mad. He said nothing to me. On another occasion, I walked out and turned off my street. This time, as I was walking uphill, I could hear footsteps behind me. I was not scared even though I heard them approaching me, even as they began running right up to my back, late at night and all alone. I continued walking calmly. I never did turn around, and nothing happened to me. I don't even remember hearing those footsteps running away. I continued towards the park and there ran into a group of strangers who I mentioned to I was afraid to go back home alone. I told them what happened and just stayed chatting there for a while. They said it's not safe to go home. I did and saw a shadow standing there motionless, and so decided to walk a different way home. I don't know what would have happened if I had continued my normal way. Case file number 635, written by Juicy Vaz. They don't make IDs like they used to. Magical. So I'm the manager of a bar in the southeast USA, and we just recently shut down to remodel. My coworkers and I had our hammers out and we were tearing down old fixtures and hauling away rubble. My other few coworkers left me alone inside so they could take items to our storage unit. While they were gone, I found 2 lost forms of ID of the same man under the mess. One was a regular driver's license, and the other was a fire department indication card of some sort. I then went to find the man on Facebook and shot him a message about both cards being found. We even had mutual friends. Then I tucked my phone away and get back to work. I made a point to place both IDs on a table. I stared at them both for a second and knew for a fact they were both sitting there side by side. I was completely alone in the building as I continued working and bagging up the scraps, and maybe 5 minutes later, I found the fire department ID again. I stare at it, absolutely bewildered, and look back at the table, and only one ID, the driver's license, was sitting there. The fire ID was buried deep under wood and trash and nails, like all the way at the bottom. There's no way it could have caught on my clothing accidentally, because I had to pick up boards to get to it. And I had looked back at the table for a good few seconds to make sure both IDs were next to each other, and they were both on that table. I looked around and was in shock. My coworkers came back moments later, and I was just staring with a dropped jaw. Welcome to the Matrix, I guess. Creepy file number 23, written by Aura Visha, the song that traumatized me. It was the early 2000s. I was about 5 to 6 years old and lived with my grandparents. My grandparents are very social people and they mostly had a lot of people at home. They had so many plans and were always out for some meetings or inaugurations, clubs, etc. I was mostly cared for by my caretakers. For example, a cook, female, a nanny, a cleaning person, also female. These 2 ladies were true chatterboxes, and when they met, they just talked and forgot that they had to worry about feeding and caring for a child. There was a person who was secretary to my grandfather while he was young, but then retired and took on the role of gardener at our home because he had no family and he was from the same village as my grandparents. So I basically was in unofficial care of him. He taught me rhymes, counting, and so on, and I was so attached to him. He was sick, and in his last days, he started taking me out to a home which had this old lady. I don't remember much, but I clearly remember that he used to drop me off at the doorstep of this house and went back. I don't have many memories, but just that she made me sit near the window and gave me meals. She sang a lot, like literally staying there in front of me and just sang some folktales. I enjoyed this at the time, but now I get scared when I think about it. She asked me a lot of questions about my parents and grandparents. One day, she just started crying loudly and started feeding me forcefully. I don't remember after that, but I just remember that I was running in front of my yard and our driver picked me up and took me to my grandfather. I told him everything, and I didn't see the gardener and that lady after that. I asked my grandparents about this, but they say they don't remember any of this. Just that the gardener guy was a secretary and died of cancer. My grandmother told me that maybe the old lady and gardener were planning a theft because none of the feeding and singing made sense. It was weird. I don't know, I just recall it sometimes and it's just I don't remember much. I remember feeling fed and sukoon, at peace, whenever I think of that home. But I don't remember much. As an adult and after having my share of bitterness in the world, I have concluded that it wasn't something innocent. It felt like it was once, but it feels creepy now. Creepy file number 23. If I were in your shoes with the same memories, looking back, I'd feel unnerved that there's a high chance people professing to take care of me and the land around my home were nothing more than opportunistic thieves biding their time. It's something that's always bothered me greatly, deep down, when people aren't genuine or are deceptive. I go through my own life trying to be as honest as possible. It doesn't always make life easy, but it's how I want to be treated myself. I do understand desperation, but from the sounds of it, this was their plan for an extended period of time. Thankfully, no one got hurt. The whole song thing sounds odd, as well as the fact that she fed you forcefully while crying. Perhaps she had grown to adore you and was upset at the true purpose for her being there. Maybe she was feeling guilty. I could see that. Case file number 636. Written by D615. The Undeniable Aroma of Love. I've been hesitant at putting this out after my sister's story, but I too had a strange experience at the time of my mom's death. Now, I'm in the USA, on the other side of the globe from my country of birth. It just so happened that I was visiting the next state over and staying the night in a hotel. So here I am in a nice clean hotel with fresh bedding. As I lay down in bed, I felt a sudden warm sensation on the top of my head. I was puzzled, so I ran my fingers through my hair. Then I had the distinct smell of the herbal oil my mom used as a cure-all. It's a family recipe and very difficult to find even in my home country. By this time, I knew my mom's health was declining, but hadn't yet been informed of her passing. So here I was in a very cowboy western part of the USA, getting a distinct aroma of a very particular home remedy from my mom's side of the family. I soon got a phone call informing me of my mom's passing. Now, in my culture, being anointed with medical oil by an older person is a sign that they are blessing you. This is done on rare occasions. The smell cannot be traced to any form of personal products or hotel room products, and it quickly vanished. Case file number 637, written by FUD Expert, Lucid Warfare. Okay, so I will try to describe this as closely and as detailed as I can recall it. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I always had vivid dreams, but not like every day. I have been attracted to the US since I was small. My dream was, and still is, to come to the US and visit it or live there. So let's get straight to the point. It was a normal day. I went to sleep and had a crazy as hell vivid dream. I must also point out that ever since I was little, I was fascinated by guns and the army. And I mean, a lot of little boys are, but I just understood a lot of things. I didn't exactly like to think about guns killing people, but just shooting them, and always was fascinated by tanks or other army vehicles because they looked cool. Now about the dream. I vividly remember I was in the army, and we were walking with my battalion through some woods. I was wearing a green uniform, like the US Army wore in the Second World War, and I don't know why, but I had a feeling we were in the woods in France. We were walking and accidentally got caught by the enemy. The next thing I know, we were in their camp and were put to execution. I saw all my comrades get killed, and I was the last one. A detail I remember, I know this is logically not possible, but it felt like I was in the middle of a circle and the enemies were pointing weapons at me. And so at one point, I just heard a signal or a scream. I don't remember correctly. Then the bullets came flying. And the messed up thing is the feeling, the pain and the burning sensation that I felt. I also remember thinking in my head, come on, just hit me again with one more bullet and I'll be dead. The next thing, I woke up sweating and feeling anxious. I never had such a vivid dream. I'm also interested in lucid dreams and everything connected to dreams, so I researched, and I know for a fact that you can't dream about something that you haven't experienced before. For example, when you dream that you die, you wake up 1 second before because your brain doesn't know what will happen next. But I know I felt those bullets drill through my body, and I felt the pain and the burn. I also remember collapsing in the floor in my own blood. Case notes, file number 637. Many small details in this. For one thing, I can't even imagine just from words what dying would feel like. My brain couldn't really process that, especially by firing squad. To experience it and then just jolt awake, it wouldn't exactly disconnect you entirely from what just happened in your mind. which your mind was still processing as reality for however long it thought that dream was real? Or do you think it was a sort of soul memory event? That you had existed, your consciousness, as one of the soldiers at war in France back in World War II, when fighting the Nazis? Maybe even a different timeline than what happened in ours, where the US fought France in World War I, but not World War II. Although you did say the uniforms didn't quite match for this. So I'm not sure. It could even be a different timeline. I mean, who's to say that if we do have reincarnation, we always come back to the same universe? That could be entwined with quantum immortality. Maybe when the last of us dies, we are reincarnated in different universes, not just the same one. Case file number 638, written by Bad Vibes Forever. To unlock the universe's secrets, you need the master key. I was asleep when Jaysa Dwayne Ricardo Onforay, aka XXX Tentacion, died. I woke up from a nap to text about it and Googled for confirmation. How graphic. How enlightened his spirit is. He spoke words that my mind could not fathom putting together, yet completely expressed my thoughts. My 12th house in astrology is Aquarius. He was an Aquarius sun. Just noting for those interested in astrology. I have also met another Aquarius sun who affected and correlated with my mind in similar and strange ways. Anyway, a year before he died, in the summer of 2017, I had a prophetic dream. I was lying on my back on the floor in the garage of the home I lived in at the time. It was daytime. The 2-car garage was filled with only one car, my mom's. My brother's car was gone. Though I was home alone, except for 2 people standing over me. My head was by the car's left and front tire. All the doors in the room and the car were closed. It was quiet. Nobody said anything the entire dream. I was not scared. The person closest to my head wore an all-black robe, hooded up so I could not see a face. He stood to the right of someone that I knew in real life. They both looked down at me. The hooded figure held out a gun and pointed it down towards me. He shot me in the neck. The immense fear and anxiety I had were worrying about how my parents would come home and find me like this. Then an immense, and the strongest feeling I've ever felt in my entire life in this capacity. A wave of bliss washed over me, and I woke up. It was of death, and that dream showed me that I should not be afraid to die. I could only explain the wave that washed over me as an even stronger feeling than an orgasm. The best feeling you could ever feel. I was going through very troubling emotions at this time. 1 year later, XXX Tentacion was shot in the neck while sitting in the driver's seat of a car in daytime the next summer. 1 year later, there was a passenger in the car who fled, yet similar to my dream, 2 hooded men were standing to the side of him as they one-shot him in the neck and he died. X had an impact on me that no one else could. At the time of this dream, I thought nothing of it. Now, I think about it a lot of the time. I'd researched prophetic dreams, explaining that it is perhaps because of chance. But how could this be so similar? Perhaps our minds and vibes and aura were and are connected in a way that no one could explain. It is also ironic to note that Organization 13, a group from the game Kingdom of Hearts, a game I love, which X and I both have in common, wears these all-black robes. I was also having a few other dreams during this time involving someone wearing this robe. I had a dream that Valentine's Day where someone was wearing the robe, and he led me out of jail in my dream and took me home where there was bright neon graffiti on the walls in a dark room. There was a slug painted neon yellow. When I took a shower that morning after I woke up, there was a yellow slug on the wall in real life. I just remembered that. I've had a few dreams involving this figure, but I don't see those as glitches, besides seeing the slug before waking up and then seeing it actually on the wall. Get the master key. XXX Tentacion. Bonus file, written by Throwaway 418603. The perfect save. I still have no idea how to explain this, but I'll tell you exactly the way my mom told me multiple times before. When I was around 4 or 5, I had a babysitter that would stay home with me during the day while my mother was working. I always insisted on waiting for my mom in front of the building we lived in, which was located near a factory that sold and recycled plastic. My nanny was holding my hand pretty tightly to prevent me from running towards the street, since the factory was always getting trucks coming and going with supplies. That particular day, she got distracted talking to a neighbor, and apparently I saw my mom waiting to cross the street and decided to run towards her as a truck was approaching. I let go of the nanny's hand and ran, and my mother said she closed her eyes and screamed because the truck was so close. There was no way someone could save me. As she closed her eyes, she begged God and a saint, I don't remember which one, to save me. And when she opened her eyes, I was standing next to her, confused as hell as to why she was crying and shaking. The truck driver got out screaming and looking for me under the truck. He was certain he had hit me. My mom asked me what happened, and I simply said, "A lady helped me cross the street," and I pointed to that said lady, but there was no one there. I still don't know how I feel about this. It wasn't my last experience with paranormal stuff. A lot happened when I moved in with my grandma, who lived in a very old house, but it sounds so movie-like. A guardian angel? I don't know. Bonus file, written by Turtley Bob. When we saw him, our flesh went cold. My toddler nephew's grandma came out of the room saying that she was thankful he had finally fallen asleep so she could use the bathroom. But my sister and I saw him follow her from the bedroom into the hallway and then run up the stairs after her. We both got a sinking, nauseous feeling in our chests the second we saw him, because we could instantly feel that it wasn't him. The energy in the room dropped and our flesh went cold. Not like chili from the wind, but the inside of my body felt like ice. Talking about it later, we realized we also felt dizzy and our vision contorted in a very abnormal way that made our heads feel like they were full of television static. It was wearing the same pajamas he was in when he went to sleep, acting similarly to him, just off, too skittish and uncomfortably playful, but it felt wrong. It did a little hop on the stairs, then climbed and ran up on its hands and feet like small kids do. Things kept very coincidentally blocking its face, a cupboard door, an arm, a doorframe. Neither of us saw its face, and we are very thankful for that. It wouldn't have been him. We looked into the bedroom and saw he was asleep, snoring on the bed. Neither of us cried easily because of fear, but we were both teary and shaking for hours after the fact. We see shadow people and hear unexplained noises, footsteps, banging, doors closing when nobody is home or awake, all the time in this house. But this is the first time multiple people have seen the exact same thing simultaneously. That does not belong here. Case notes, bonus file. When you reference how cold you both felt, and special emphasis on the fact it was two people simultaneously affected in the same manner, my guess is this was your own internal soul, spirit, or player, whatever you want to call it, the essence inside of us that animates us and gives us free will. And in this case, specific discernment. It gave you the ability to see that this wasn't right. Call it knowledge or intuition, but even without seeing your nephew's face, you both somehow knew for certain it was not him. Maybe a demon was impersonating him for a nefarious reason? By all accounts, it sounds like nothing bad happened to your nephew's grandma, so I'm not sure what the purpose was, besides to terrify you both, I guess. And it does more than simply animate us, the essence in us. It's the true us. And I think there are entities out there that hate us for what we have. They want to torment and break us because they cannot be what we are. Just a theory. Case file number 639, written by Metamara Redbird. To pass through solid concrete, just close your eyes. I am a Cherokee Indian Meta, the Cherokee word for prophetess. We can see and interact with spirits from birth, so tons of really awesome paranormal stuff happens to me constantly. I always say I'm so sad for people that don't believe in the true magic of life and reality, because it's as if they only get to see life in black and white, not color. Sad that I'm sure some people won't even believe this, and that breaks my heart. I swear to my daughter and the spirits, this is 100% true and not one bit exaggerated. Anywho, I was around 16 and was with my first ever love who unfortunately wasn't the greatest influence on my cousin. We were getting a ride home from my ex's best friend who was also my cousin's boyfriend, and he was on a lot of Xanax. We were weed smokers, but nothing else as I have always been a good girl. It was very late at night and we didn't want to bother our parents to drive an hour to pick us up. Besides me being a meta, we know the spirits always have our backs. He kept slamming on the brakes thinking it was a clutch, which was so annoying. But the worst was when he would completely fall asleep at the wheel and we had to scream at him to wake up. We were all in the back seat because my cousin was fighting with him badly because he took Xanax again after promising not to. That's why none of us could grab the wheel. Well, fast forward and we're on the interstate and he's flying. We keep asking him to slow down, which he does, but then being on Xanax, forgets and inevitably speeds up again. One time, he sped up fast and fell asleep at the wheel right as a massive curve in the road happens, and of course, our screams were to no avail. My ex started punching him, also to no avail, so we just screamed and braced for impact as soon as we saw the car inches from the concrete wall. As we all braced ourselves, we either closed our eyes or covered our faces and screamed in terror to then realize nothing happened. So when we all opened our eyes and looked around, the car is going perfectly straight and we're long after the massive curve. We were all in shock and still to this day talk about it. We always wonder what really happened and what we would have seen had we not closed our eyes in terror. I really think that if any of us would have opened our eyes, we would have wrecked. I love to study a lot of quantum physics and I think the whole wave-particle thing applies here. Only when not observing can the particle become a wave again and act spooky, or out of the classical function. When we opened our eyes, he was still out. After it happened, my cousin jumped into the front seat, smacked the hell out of him in the face and got the car pulled over, and she jumped on top of him. It was a stick shift. None of us could drive, she just pulled the car over to stop it, and go nuts on him, plus talk about what just happened. Also, just wanted to mention, my beautiful regalia makes me look like a beautiful giant bird with all the feathers and the massive wings that span like a foot past my hands in both directions, and the tail feathers on my back. It's just so beautiful. Here's a picture. Creepy file number 24, written by Northern Hunter, the Polar Stalker. For some background, I'm a male in my late 20s, living in northern Canada. Last weekend, I got a call from a friend telling me that while on his skidoo ride, he went by my cabin, as it was on his route, and that it looked like someone broke into it and smashed out all the windows. I was devastated. I went out to my shed to load up my skidoo and sled with boards and tarps to repair the windows, hoping to keep some of the snow out of my cabin until I can properly replace the windows in the spring. Just as I was about to leave, I got this gut feeling that something was wrong and that I should take a rifle just in case. Better to be safe than sorry. As I started my ride in the woods, I noticed the sky getting darker and thought to myself, great, now I'll have a storm to deal with too. Luckily, it wasn't a snowstorm, but a thick fog that rolled in fast. There is nothing more unsettling than being alone in the woods encased in thick fog, especially with God knows what around you. I finally get to my cabin, and sure enough, all of the windows are smashed. I unload my gear and get to work, trying to get my cabin secure as fast as I can and get the hell out of there. At some point, I feel like I'm being watched, which gives me a lump in my throat because I can't see anything in this fog. I hear something moving through the trees and automatically grab my rifle and put my back to the cabin, hoping that if something comes out of the fog, I'll be ready for it. My first thought was, it was the bastard who broke into my cabin, coming back under the cover of fog to see what else they could take. But then I realized that no skidoo approached me, as I would have heard one from miles away, as it was too quiet out here. After waiting a while with no more noises coming from the woods, I go back to work, get my windows fixed, and return back to my skidoo to get the hell out of there. After a short ride, I notice something that looks like potholes in the middle of the trail. Turns out to be polar bear tracks leading towards my cabin. That creepy feeling of being watched and the noises from the woods was a polar bear stalking me, and was the actual culprit of the break-in at my cabin. What disturbs me the most is that I would never have seen it coming with all that fog that day, and my rifle would have been particularly useless against such a big animal. To this day, I feel lucky to be alive. Case file number 640, written by Chemical 420. The simplest question to give someone chills. I live in a small, single apartment and have been here for about 5 years. When I first moved in, my upstairs neighbor was a guy who we will call Eli. He lived above me for about a year and a half and was friendly enough. One day when I bumped into him, he asked if I was feeling a bit better. I had not been sick, so I asked what he meant. He laughed and told me I must have been more out of it than he thought. From what he told me, we had talked a few nights earlier and I seemed to think he had moved away. I had absolutely no recollection of this event. I honestly just assumed it was just a very odd attempt at humor and forgot about it. That was roughly 3 years ago, and now I have a young couple living above my apartment. So last night when I was coming home from the bar, and guess who I ran into? Eli was walking up the sidewalk to what used to be his apartment. I was a little tipsy. Nowhere close to drunk though, so I happily greeted him and started making all the usual catch-up small talk. Naturally, I asked him what he was doing back here, and he was as confused as I had been. Somewhere in our interaction, I suddenly remembered the conversation from years ago and must have turned pale because he asked if I was feeling alright. I assured him I was fine, but when I went inside, I left my door open slightly, and sure enough, I heard him unlock the upstairs door and go inside. I am really not sure how to feel about what happened, but I've had this surreal feeling ever since. Bonus file, written by Say No to Grow. Don't judge a book by its voice. This is really weird and happened about 6 months ago. As I was falling asleep, a mean, evil voice said, "Your dad's gonna die." It was very evil sounding. It was so scary. I prayed to God to protect my dad because I wasn't sure if it was a dream or not. It felt real and vivid. I did not tell anyone about it. The very next day, I started feeling dizzy and nauseous. It was so bad I couldn't even stand up straight. The room was spinning. Then my dad called me. He said he was scared because he was dizzy and nauseous. It was weird because it was like I was experiencing the exact same thing at that very moment. I was asking him questions like if he had chest pains, and suddenly he stopped responding. I'm like, "Dad, answer me or I'm calling 911. No response. So I called 911. My dad lives 35 minutes from me. I felt helpless. I prayed again and remembered my dream and was in total panic. My dizziness went away. The paramedics got there and my dad was conscious. He refused to go to the hospital because he's stubborn as hell. Long story short, we went to the doctor, had a CT scan done. His carotid artery was severely blocked and he suffered a small stroke. He had surgery and is doing okay now. However, his memory is worse than ever and I'm scared about vascular dementia. I'm glad he's still here. The odd thing is, why did the voice sound so evil? It literally warned me. I believe my prayers helped the situation, but I'm confused about it. However, there's no way that was a coincidence. It literally happened the next day. Just thought I'd share. Case notes, bonus file. The author has requested that anyone who feels so inclined to pray that their father is safe and lives a long and healthy life. While I don't consider myself religious, I'm happy to offer my own goodwill into the universe, to whatever entity, if any, can help, or might feel compelled to. I hope that does work, and I hope that your father does live a long and healthy life, with many more decades to come. You know, it's just so heavy to have a close loved one be at risk of death. Not dead, but at risk. It would put you at complete unease all the time. But to be warned by a voice that sounds so evil, I wonder if this was a mental translation error? So perhaps your brain received this information by a benevolent entity, but because the information to your subconscious was so perilous and terrifying, your subconscious translated the inner voice as sounding evil when it related to the conscious part of your brain. Just a thought, because it would be very odd if it was an actual demon that decided to switch sides and be good. This isn't supernatural. Case file number 641, written by Didi's Laboratory. My soul, the void, and fear beyond description. I love to drive for DoorDash in my free time. Something about getting out past midnight and just driving is very soothing to me. Why not make some money doing it too? My wife hates it though. Specifically, me going out past midnight in what she calls the bad side of town. I don't see it like that though. I've driven for DoorDash for a bit now, and I've never once felt even slightly fearful for my own safety, much less a fear for my life, and I love driving on the west side, south side, and downtown around midnight. Let me run through my shift tonight. I started my dash at around 5 p.m. to hit the dinner rush. It was slow, so I did a lot of waiting for a while. 6 p.m., I started feeling oddly restless, in a way I haven't felt before. I felt like I needed to get out of my car and run a mile, like I couldn't keep my legs still. I parked at a gas station to walk around and get a soda and some water to calm my nerves. It worked for a bit. 7 p.m., I drove to the west side. I felt great and was doing well with how much I was making. No changes in how I did things at all. It was just a very average hour. Only thing I noticed was I was making tons of stupid mistakes. I was missing turns, driving too slow, even stopped at a green light as if it was a stop sign. 8 p.m. I started working to the south side. This is when things got weird. I left the west side with the sun still showing, but by the time I made it, the sun was completely gone. It was odd considering I have never noticed it get so dark so fast before. I drive this almost every day, but this was different. It didn't just get dark in a normal way, it got dark normally, but this time I was hyper aware of it. It's hard to explain, but I just noticed it much more than before. This is when my anxiety started creeping back. My legs got restless again. I started feeling like I needed to get out of my car and run a mile again. I brushed it off though and continued my work, although I did remain hyper aware of the darkness, and during one order when I was picking up food, I could feel it. The darkness was heavy and deep. Almost like a low frequency that I couldn't hear but was vibrating throughout my body. I could feel the heaviness of my heart causing strain on my chest, and I thought I could hear it drumming in my ears. At 9 p.m., I accepted an order that took me to the western area of the south side. An area and neighborhood I've been in hundreds of times before. I stopped my car at the house and something hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt scared, but not like average fear. There was this absolute sense of complete and total dread that overtook me. In an instant, I felt like I was being stared at. And I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but I'm being completely serious when I say that I would have bet all my money that there was someone in the backseat of my car. I could feel the heaviness, just like earlier in the night tonight. Sitting in my car in front of this home, I started to tear up as I felt closer to death than I ever had before. I worked up the bravery to turn around, but of course, nothing was in my backseat besides the darkness that felt so heavy, like it was made of solid matter. God, I cannot explain how physical the darkness of my backseat felt, like I was staring at a person sitting in the backseat. Like their weight was being put onto the car, but no one was there. I got out of my car and saw another car pull up in the driveway of the home. I thought maybe I could hand it to them and get on my way, but they just sat in the car looking at me and looking down at the shining light that I could see was their phone. They did this 3 more times before I worked up the bravery and walked the order to the door, every step further increasing my sense of absolute horror. I dropped it off, took the picture, and rushed to my car. I turned to my left, seeing the person still sitting in their car in the driveway, face illuminated by their phone, just staring at me. I locked my doors and looked at the back seat. Still nobody was there, and it was confirmed due to the light being on from the opening of the door, but because I locked the door, the light slowly dimmed to darkness. The feeling was heavier than ever before. As soon as the darkness of my backseat hit again, it was like the car was full of people sitting back there just staring intensely back at me. I couldn't look away from the darkness. I felt like I was being crushed by the fear, anxiety, and that very darkness. I turned my car around and drove off, noticing how the person in the car in the driveway was no longer in the car. 9:30 hit and I closed out my shift. I was sobbing in the driver's seat with my inside car lights on as I drove home. My mind was spinning. I was lightheaded. The sense of absolute total horror was gone, and in its place, a void, emptiness, as if something occupied my soul for just a moment and then left it wide open and vacant. I walked into my home. My wife greeted me, noting how I returned early. I fell into her arms and sobbed again. It is now 11 p.m. I'm sitting on my couch with all the lights on, and I feel utterly alone, empty, completely void of all emotion besides one feeling. A slight semblance of fear sitting in that empty void. My wife wanted me to take out the trash to the dumpster outside, but I can't do it. I don't know why, but I can't go back outside in the dark. Please, someone, tell me what happened tonight. If there's one true thing I can say about this, is that this was not normal fear. It was something I've never felt before, like a fear that was embedded in my soul, and it's something I pray to God no one else ever has to experience. Case file number 642, written by Bruce by the Foot. The most mind-bending catch-up story you've ever heard of. Here's a short, mundane story, but definitely a glitch nonetheless. Back in 2017, my cousin, his girlfriend and I all traveled to Sacramento to visit an old friend of mine. Now, we didn't get any rooms since my friend said he could house all of us, which turned out that he expected everyone to cuddle up and sleep on his bed with him. Not ideal, but it worked out. Anyway, after the first night, we all rose to his family out in the kitchen prepping a traditional Mexican breakfast for us. I still can't believe how lovely his family is. And laid out for us were condiments. Hash browns were part of breakfast, so the ketchup bottle was being passed around. I swear to God, I was actively watching and waiting for an appropriate time to take my turn with the ketchup bottle, and I watched it get passed between the entirety of my friend's family before it finally reached my hands. Nothing wrong with that at all, but I squeezed what looked like to be a relatively new bottle of ketchup, and I could not get anything out. I squeezed harder and harder, but I got concerned I was going to pop the lid off. Now, everyone is looking at me all confused, right? So I asked my cousin for help, and he tried and also couldn't get anything out, and then his girlfriend tried with the same result. So now everyone is really confused. And that's when I unscrewed the cap, and every single one of us saw that the bottle was factory sealed. Nobody had an answer for what the hell just happened. Rest of the trip was great and normal, but every now and then I bring it up just to make sure it really happened. And everybody seems to remember it the same. Case file number 643, written by I Am Jimmy M. A rest stop unlike any other. This happened about 2 months ago on a stretch of highway near where I had another very odd experience involving time dilation. So this time, I'm headed back home after visiting my parents about an hour and a half south of my place, and I have to pee. So I'm in an area I've driven through hundreds of times, and I've stopped at certain gas stations probably 50 plus times to pee in the past. I take the exit I've taken so many times before, only when I come to the stop sign at the top of the off-ramp, there is no gas station to my right. Just a vast landscape of farmland and a few strands of trees. It feels all of a sudden like the density of the air got thicker as well. There should be an on-ramp directly in front of me if I wanted to get back onto the freeway. It's definitely missing. I take my right turn after a minute of sitting there bewildered. I slowly drive down an abandoned and desolate road to another T intersection. As I'm sitting at this stop sign, still bewildered, another car appears in my rearview mirror. They eventually, slowly, pull up alongside me. They stopped and looked bewildered as well. The driver in a newish Subaru Outback turned to me and shrugged with a worried look on her face. It was like 11:30 at night and there were no lights on the road. She turned right, I turned left. I eventually came upon the next town down the road and re-entered the freeway, but it was like 3 miles down the road. I drove past the exit with the gas station last night around 1 a.m. It's still there. Bright yellow shell lights ablaze in the otherwise dark landscape. Exit and entrance are as normal as they once were. I no longer use that exit as a rest stop. Case notes. file number 643. Just a quick guess, but I'm thinking you probably were in another universe briefly, or at least you perceived it. So here we have the standard alternate universe hypothesis, that you jumped to another universe that was mostly similar to yours, but with obvious differences like the shell not being there. But the weird thing and what doesn't fit is the other person in the Subaru was there with you. Unless for some reason you both entered this new universe for no apparent reason together. I've never heard of that happening. I have heard of people crossing over in quantum mortality together if they die at the same time, perhaps related to close familial bonds. If you have loved ones, friends, family, maybe your own personal family, your wife and your kids, then you'd be more likely to cross over with them to the same new universe. There are so many that if it was random, it would be astronomically impossible to wind up together. So yeah, in your case, it probably was just a perception glitch. In fact, the Shell station was probably right there, you just weren't able to see it. You and this other girl were just witnessing the other universe, and it was like a drape was put over your eyes, and you could only perceive how this universe was, but not the universe you still were in. It's weird, and I keep thinking back to this one story a long time ago where there was this guy who was a real estate broker or something like that. He was inspecting a unit, and then it was completely different from one second to the other. His perception entirely changed. I don't think he actually went to another universe and then was pulled back. I think he just was able to see the universe that was already there, one of almost infinite. I wonder what triggers this. I personally think that there's something in your brain that is different to be able to connect to this. But I also think there's some trigger in the world that happens. And I think it's pretty clear that this is the case because the other girl was there with you at the same time perceiving it. So two people with the ability to, and in the correct location for it to happen. And there's more evidence of that because you went back and the Shell station was indeed there. So it did return. Well, in my theory, it never left. It just, you couldn't see it. Briefly. Bonus file, written by Lord of Flies, Beelzebub. A picture worth 1,000 words and 1,000,000 hugs. This is a heavy story. 3 months ago, I was assaulted by someone senior to me at work. I was 19 myself, and the other person who did it was 53. It was a crap day. I reported it as soon as he was away from me and headed home. It's a short drive. But every second, all I could think was, every moment takes you further away. I got home, and when I was asked what was wrong, it all came out. Fast forward to 3 days later, and I was anxious, crying at everything and convinced the person would be angry because I reported it and come after me. I made it to around 2 a.m. and couldn't sleep. I was sobbing in my bed. Now, here's where I have to explain the layout of my room. I have a string of fairy lights over my bed, with pegs that hold pictures. The one above where I was holds a picture of my grandfather. The window was closed, as was the door. There were no radiators or fans. My grandfather had passed away unexpectedly when I was 3. It was only recently revealed how, and I cannot tell people how, as I know my family are very concerned about it. But let's say it was abrupt and caused a lot of pain for everyone. I relate to my grandfather the more I hear about him, but I don't remember him well at all. But often catch myself wishing I could ask his advice or speak with him. I'm laying in bed and I notice the fairy lights swaying like they would if caught in a breeze. But there is no breeze, nothing that could possibly generate one. I see his picture and I feel an urge to grab it. When I do it, it stops swaying and I feel a sense of complete calmness. I take it down from the peg and just sit a while, staring at it. I get the feeling someone is sitting by me. You know how you feel when the blankets stretch when someone sits on your bed? And I felt more comfortable than I had in a long, long time. Like I knew no matter what, everything would be okay. I genuinely can't explain it. I've tried sleeping tea, Ambience, anxiety medicine, and distractions, everything, and all of a sudden it just stopped. And slowly, over the next few days, I felt better. I could be imagining it. Please don't think I'm crazy. But I genuinely feel like someone or something, most likely my grandfather, was there. Case notes, bonus file. Right, so in common thought, ghosts or echoes are believed to be very cold, low energy. If they're around us, the energy is almost sapped away from us in the same way that heat is drawn towards cold. The universe always wants to equalize energy states. I do wonder though, in cases of extreme bonds existing, is there some cancellation to this energy draw? You report nothing of feeling cold. In fact, the exact opposite. You felt warm, safe, protected, re-energized. Maybe if some spirits linger behind, to those whom they have an intense connection with, their presence charges them up. It could explain those random moments where we're feeling low and then suddenly get a burst of energy and excitement seemingly from nowhere. It's a beautiful thought that this is the imprinted energy left behind by our loved ones. And by the way, you are extremely strong for even sharing this with us. I thank you tremendously for that, and hang in there. Things will be better.